With the announcement of the remaster that in my opinion looks very much like a remake for Devil Summoner Raidou Kuzunoha vs. the Soulless Army, I think it's finally time I get around to making a video on some of my favorite games from Atlus. These have been games I have been wanting to review for a long time. I have repeatedly mentioned wanting to do a video as far back as the Gungrave Overdose review 4 years ago. It's been that long? Jesus, where's my time gone? I should have been done covering all of the PS2 action games already so I could start my quest for the best mecha game series. Raidou Kuzunoha is one of the coolest characters ever made. Dude was one of the original Auror farmers in the year of Taisho 20. He fought the Yakuza and won with his fucking meat out. He had his flute swinging while he's cold cocking Yakuza like he's making a run for the UFC Undisputed Belt. Since most people haven't played these games due to how rare they are in North America, and with the remake of the first game coming out hopefully after this video and not before, I'm going to keep the story spoilers to a dedicated segment for each game. So if you want to go in blind for yourself outside of knowing gameplay mechanics, then you are safe to watch until the spoiler warnings. Atlus during the PS2 era was putting out so many back-to-back bangers it was insane. An all-time lineup of Persona 3, Persona 4, Raidou 1, Raidou 2, Digital Devil Saga 1, Digital Devil Saga 2, and most importantly, SMT 3 Nocturne. That's not even mentioning all of the non-SMT related Atlus releases like Stella Deus, which people in my stream chat kept telling me to check out while I was collecting footage for this video. Along with Atlus being the publisher for a bunch of random PS2 games that I personally really like. For example, they localized Samurai Western for some reason. Of course, Atlus has made many beloved games before and after, but this specific output period of Atlus games is by far my favorite. This era has some of the coolest aesthetics ever put to video games. That's not to say their modern games aren't some of the most visually jaw-dropping games on the market, but there is something about how Atlus adapted Kaneko's art style into 3D for these specific SMT games that I adore. Kaneko's art is some of my favorite out there. His designs for the devil triggers of DMC3 are still the best designs in the series, with his design for Virgil's being my all-time favorite. I just love how its angular features come together to capture Virgil's cold and methodical personality. It's the perfect middle ground of super busy and super sleek design. The way he draws Virgil's face in DT really accentuates that intimidating presence he's supposed to be having over the course of the game, how much stronger and better he is than you when you encounter him in Virgil Fight 2. I overall like the designs for DMC5 Devil Triggers, but man, I would love to live in a timeline where Kaneko did them, or a potential timeline where the series just kept Kaneko's art style and made the games look like that completely, instead of just in the concept art. Could you imagine how amazing a DMC3 that looked like Nocturne would be? The way characters look in these games really reminds me of the 80s animes by Osamu Dezaki that feature character designs by Akio Sugino, like Aim for the Ace, Golgo 13, and my personal all-time favorite Ashitano Joe 2. These characters have very long and sharp facial features, high and or pronounced cheekbones that make their profiles striking and really stand out with the way shadows hit people's faces as a result. No one was doing it like Kaneko in the 2000s, baby! Let's just ignore that currently he's releasing some AI slop game that bastardizes his style, but we'll just ignore that and remember the good times. To hone in on the aesthetics of Devil Summoner 1, the use of pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera perspectives allows this game to visually remain timeless. There are so many amazing shots they were able to achieve with smart camera placements. It allows the locales to be extremely striking and stand out from one another. I love the color choices of this game. It has that PS2 SMT perfect blend of highly saturated colors mixed with really washed out ones, a more stylized version of the visual aesthetics Death Stranding would end up going for, especially for its machinery. The color choices really help the menus of this game stand out. Sure, by today's standards they aren't Persona 5 or Metaphors menus, but I really enjoy the patterns and the falling cherry blossoms. It clearly conveys information while being stylized and simplistic without being minimalistic and dull, so it gets a passing grade in my book. To loop back around to the 80s anime connection, I really like how the chapters of this game are framed like episodes of an old detective anime, with simplistic yet effective title cards and music stingers. The only thing it's missing is Dazaki's postcard memories, and then we'd be truly embodying the best aesthetics from all this shit that I personally like. Even the box art is dripping style with its holographic cover art. Sadly, 2's isn't holographic, but it came with this Raiho plushie, so sacrifices had to be made. I don't know what it is about the art of Raidou Kuzunoha 1's cover, but I like it so much that I actually have a super high-res scan of it that's dimensions are like 7,000 by 9,000 pixels. It has so much detail you can zoom in and even see the grain and pieces of hair, either from whoever scanned this art or Kaneko himself. I really wish more box arts that are actually really good existed in uncompressed sizes like this so you can take in all of that detail. The new artwork for the remaster also looks phenomenal. This shit goes hard as fuck. This game has so much aesthetic that even its disc goes hard. I don't know how many people know this or have talked about it, but I have discovered from importing Japanese-only action games that Japanese disc art during this era was so much nicer than what we got in America. It was a little hard to capture with my camera, but usually these had shiny textured 3D designs on them. Even games we ended up getting had less flair and instead just went for printing a picture on the disc. Devil Summoner 1 is the only game I have personally gotten for myself where the North American copy is just as nice as the usual Japanese-style discs. The seller I bought the game on eBay from a few years ago was even nice enough to include their old GameStop receipt to show me just how much I was getting ripped off, as they bought it for like $20 while charging me an upwards of $150. If I wasn't using stupid purchases like this to establish credit so I could rent an apartment, I would not be going for purchases like this. But seriously, who the fuck saves their receipt from 2009 to sell a game in 2020? It feels like this is something that should go without saying, but yes, to no one's surprise, this Atlus game has great music. It features a bunch of really catchy noir tracks, some shit you'd hear while a cop took a deep drag of a cigarette while looking over a murdered corpse. The saxophone goes crazy. You know that these would be playing on a vinyl in Cole Phelps' office. But that's not all the music that this game has. Despite coming out 2 years prior to it, and the previous entry coming out only 4 months after this game, the rest of Devil Summoner 1's rock music feels closest to Persona 4 more than anything else. The guitar riffs just kept making me picture Persona 4 in my head anytime I'd hear them. While it's not my favorite SMT story, I do really like the writing of this game. The dynamic between Raidou, Goto, Narumi, and Tei is great. They bounce off each other well, and I enjoy that Raidou gets a good amount of characterization despite being a silent protagonist. He's kinda like Drakengard's Kaim minus all the, child murder. He's a real charming dude and slowly builds a web of connections around town to help solve all of the mysteries that come his way by relying on everyone's unique backgrounds and skills. By the end of the game, everyone just really likes the guy. They just enjoy having him around. It's reminiscent of those small town type stories where you see your titular character walk past a store and the shop owner comes out and goes, "Hey, Raidou, how you doing, man? I haven't seen ya." Like, for example, episode 4 is somewhat of a side case from the main plot, which revolves around you helping the local store and its stolen shipments. The cool way this impacts gameplay is that because of the stolen stock, items that you can buy from the store are increased in price for this chapter, so you ask for help from the local Yakuza and the shipping companies to get everyone to work together to straighten this mystery out. Despite it not impacting the outcome of the game to my knowledge, at multiple points you are able to choose dialogue options when talking to characters like the main villains as they are explaining their motivations to you, asking Raidou if he understands what they are trying to achieve and if he wants to help them accomplish their goals. Since the game has a limited number of save slots and I always rotate my saves if possible so I don't soft lock myself or leave myself the ability to go back and test things, I eventually sadly overwrote the saves before these options without seeing what they would do if I chose them. Seeing what would happen if Raidou went, "Yeah man, I totally understand what you're going for, I'm on board." Since the game doesn't have an alignment system like mainline SMT games, I imagine the villains would just have a unique line line of dialogue before Goto would go, "Dude, what the fuck?" and things would proceed as normal. It's still cool that it gives you the option as another potential avenue to characterize your interpretation of Raidou's character. I am very curious how the writing of the original localization will translate to both the newly present voice acting and the dialogue as a whole in the remaster. The game uses a lot of lingo, which I can't really comment on its accuracy to the time period or the original text. I imagine they took some creative liberties when bringing this dialogue to English, but it does help sell that old-timey detective serial feel the game is going for. Characters use a lot of phrases that I imagine myself hearing in a black and white soap opera my grandfather would be watching while they were babysitting me at their house when I was 6 years old. I really hope they keep this wordplay, or at the very least feature something that gives the same vibe. If Narumi isn't talking like he hangs out in a dingy, smoke-filled speakeasy, then what's the fucking point? At the time of writing this, we only have the reveal trailer for the remaster/remake thing, and while they are keeping the fixed perspective when traveling, which makes me happy, since I hate that video games have pretty much moved away from it, the lack of pre-rendered backgrounds and some of the color choices does make me a little worried about this version of the game. This would not be the first time that a remaster or up port of one of their games had its visuals messed up from their original version. I think that the original's aesthetics are amazing, and I would hate to see it be messed up in a version that would finally be accessible for most people for the first time, but only time will tell. I personally don't think that you can say, well, it's early footage and maybe it will change closer to release, since the game is 2 months away from its reveal. But who knows, maybe there will be some massive overhauls that weren't ready for that trailer but will be for the release date. Okay, so since writing this, Atlus has given us a bit more info on the combat and quality of life overhauls for this game. A lot of the combat changes are to make the game play more like the second one. And since this video ended up taking so long to make, the remake ended up coming out and I played it to completion, so a review for it will be at the end of the video instead of just talking about changes and speculated changes like it was originally intended to. I'd also like to take a moment to plug my Patreon and YouTube membership as the best way to support me and the channel, especially when I make gigantic videos like this that balloon in size when they were originally supposed to be something quick, short, and easy. The real meat of Devil Summoner 1 is its gameplay. I want to say this right out the gate, that this game is the sum of its parts. Everything comes together to elevate it into a very unique experience even by SMT standards. If you are coming for any individual aspect alone, like the combat for example, you will be left frustrated and disappointed. Your melee combat is shallow. You have a 3-hit melee combo, a charge attack 360 spin, and a stinger. You have a gun as your secondary attack on triangle, which you can cancel into after the first 2 swings of your melee combo, but not the third for some reason. Your gun has a plethora of ammo, which functions as Raidou's ability to deal elemental damage to demons since he can't use magic himself. When hitting enemies' weak points with the right elemental bullets, this will result in stunning them. If you follow up with a melee attack, it does massive damage and builds towards the team attack super moves your active demon will have if it is unlocked. These range from a screen-wide Goog Nuke, single target melee strike, or the iconic buffs and debuffs of the SMT series. You get invincibility frames when activating these, so it's a great way to dodge massively damaging incoming attacks from super strong enemies or bosses. You are able to have one active demon at a time, which will fight alongside you controlled by an AI. You can swap between them on the fly by pressing R1, which opens the active menu, allowing you to spend some mag to summon them. The active menu also allows you to choose their combat natures, making it so they focus on preserving mana, focus on healing you, only going for enemy weaknesses, and so on. The one saving grace that prevents this from repeating the issues of begging Mitsuru to heal you in the original Persona 3 is that you are able to tell your demons exactly what you want them to do and who you want them to do it to. This is a lifesaver in really cluttered fights where you need them to take out high priority targets and not get stuck fighting random shit mobs and wasting their precious MP. It also makes it easier to capture new demons so your controlled demons don't end up killing them while you are in the process of expanding your current lineup. Instead of the series' iconic negotiation system, you capture new demons by hitting their weak point and shoving them into your tubes while they are stunned. Kinda like an awkward attempt at Pokemon, you know, without worrying of legal issues. It still works on the standard SMT rules, so you can't capture capture demons higher than your level, or any demon during specific moon phases. As you fight alongside your demons in battle, you are able to raise their affinity. Maxing affinity usually results in receiving an item, being given a full heal, or having them replenish their health and/or mana. Higher affinity means lower mag costs for summons, along with allowing you to fuse them, because if you don't have max affinity, there runs into issues where they'll say, "No bro, you're not fusing me, fuck off," and then go right back into their tube. You need these fuckers to be ride or die for you. They gotta be willing to jump on a grenade for you. There are also consumable sakes you can give demons to raise their affinity artificially, like rare candies, which helps mitigate potential grinding. These are a massive help in late game when you get some really powerful demons that have high mag costs, so you want to lower them as fast as possible by raising their affinity as fast as possible. You want to constantly be raising affinities with new demons and replace anyone that you have maxed out with someone that fits the same niche, because that's how you increase your storage of mag and level up your reputation, which gets you more tubes to eventually have 12 demons in your party. The game has a lot of smartly placed systems to incentivize you doing this, even if there is always a part of me that just wants to stick to my favorites who have carved out their own niches. I'm sorry SMT, I know you want me to just keep moving on and tossing my old shitty demons to the side, but I love this goofy car demon. He's my ride or die. I'm taking him to the end. If I'm not gonna use him to merge without looking on the highway to cause a 16-car pileup, can I really call myself a devil summoner? Your equivalent to the Cathedral of Shadow in this game actually has a lot of interesting mechanics when it comes to your demons and fusing them. Victor can give you a whole lecture on the possibilities. You are able to sacrifice demons in the lab to strengthen other ones. You can go to the bar to trade them in for mag so you don't find yourself running out if you summon too many high-cost guys, or have to rotate your full party to find out what overworld skills you need. To increase Raidou's power beyond level ups, you can fuse demons with your swords to make new ones. This is something you will come to see as you play through the game, that if anything, Devil Summoner has a lot of well thought out systems that complement each other to prevent players from getting stuck. There is always someone to talk to help push you in the right direction, some safety nets in place to prevent soft locking and minimize grinding. Personally, I didn't really use most of them, since if you want to critique them, they are often really out of the way of what you are currently doing. Yes, these are systems that give you reasons to discard demons without just releasing them and throwing them into the void, but if you want to get that mag value for trading them in at the bar or sacrificing them to make your current lineup stronger, while also clearing up space for your tubes to capture new stronger demons, that means you're gonna have to exit dungeons and make your way back to these locations, which means pace-breaking story moments and dungeon traversal, along with getting into more random battles, which is ballooning your playtime. You can't help shake the feeling of, well, I'm already here in the dungeon halfway through, I may as well finish it. Maybe these will become more convenient in the remake as one of the quality of life changes they have pitched. Even in saying this, I can appreciate that the devs were conscious enough to put safety nets for struggling players. It's a good sign that the developers are cognizant of the potential weak spots or oversights in their system's designs. The combat arenas you fight in are these fixed perspective little diorama-like boxes. The closest analog to these, if you've been watching all of the PS2 action game videos, is the combat arenas in Golden Knight Garou. I find them very charming and think they work for most of the game. It's only in the final hours of the game, when you are fighting some massive demons, does visual clarity become an issue, since demons don't dither when being in front of them, so it will be easy to lose track of where Raidou is and not have a good gauge of depth perception. Beyond this game being an action RPG, the other big selling point for its unique experience is that you can take control of the iconic SMT demons and send them out on solo missions. They are not visible to the human eye, so they are a great way for a detective to gather information or sneak into places he's not supposed to. There are 8 different clans a demon can belong to, which dictates their overworld skills they can have. For example, pagan demons can read people's minds, pyro demons can ignite them to reinvigorate their spirits, frost demons can calm them down, and you get the idea. This adds an extra layer to your party building and exploration, because you always want to have at least one demon from each clan, so you aren't locked out of potential skill uses for optional content or main story. The only downside is that sometimes you have to deal with the agonizing nail on a chalkboard noises that they make as they walk around. Some of these are so awful, I don't know why they left them in. I really love this system. It allows the world to have so much stuff hidden away in it and reward you for experimenting, exploring, and trying to piece everything around you together. You know, like a detective. To give an example of how crazy some of these are, you can read the mind of a dog in the junkyard in Chapter 2. It'll ask you a question, and if you remember what you told the dog at the door before the final boss at the end of the game, at least 20 plus hours later, you get rewarded by being teleported to a secret room with a ton of goodies. The game is filled with random shit like this that it will just let you completely miss or randomly get sucked into some rabbit hole and OCD obsess over until you look up a guide. Unfortunately, I did not consult a guide for the playthrough for this video, so I did not get the ability to make Raidou, but he's here with us in spirit. The demon solo system is such a huge selling point for me that I don't think I would like this game nearly as much if it wasn't present. It's such a simple yet fun mechanic that adds so much to the experience that it helps prevent the shallow and repetitive combat from bogging down the overall package. I'm not delusional. Sure, I have some rose-tinted glasses on when looking at this game that makes me get more out of it than the average person, an appreciation for games of this era that are being experimental even if they fall flat on their face, because the PS2 was the era of innovation and experimentation for action games. But I am fully aware that this shit is basic as hell and the combat encounters are more than plentiful. The repulse waters that lower encounter rates can only do so much, especially when they randomly run out after a few steps. This is because they always turn off no matter what when the moon phase hits new, so you want to try and use them during a moon phase where you can maximize the amount of efficiency. So you want to use it right after it becomes a new moon phase so you have time for it to go to full and then back down to new. You're basically going to be wasting it if you use it anytime after it becomes a full moon phase going back down to a new moon phase, and it's between like 5 to 1. Though I will say it does feel pretty random when and how fast a moon phase changes. Sometimes it's only a few steps and feels instant. Other times you could be running in circles for multiple minutes just to try to get it back into spots where you want it to, either for encounter rates, fusions, or whatever. I really don't know what is causing this. I don't know if it's contextualized by where you are in the story, what dungeon you're in, what level you are compared to the dungeon, and if you're using the repulse water regularly, it's going to throw you off of the XP curve and the intended level curve for these dungeons. This is still a stat and number-based JRPG at the end of the day. Your active gameplay can only get you so far before you're dealing piss-poor damage and are unable to capture anything in any of the areas you're in if you aren't constantly fighting. Like, I used a bunch of repulse waters in the second to last dungeon because it frankly has way too much backtracking for how many encounters you'll have, and because of this I was too underleveled to recruit any of the demons in the final dungeon, so I had to reload my save and do some much needed grinding even if I really didn't want to. So while these repulse waters are present and an option in the game, it still fully expects you to do every combat encounter you run into. Otherwise you will be missing XP and will be underleveled. This is something that all Atlus games suffer from to some extent in my opinion. Those moments where you just want to make progress but can't take 3 steps without getting into a random battle. This is honestly what makes this game longer than it otherwise would be. You'll understand if and when you go to play this game for yourself, but when you can't get from one end of a hallway without 3 random battles, it makes what easily could have been a 10-hour game that remains satisfying and doesn't get super repetitive at the end of the day to a roughly 30-hour game that by the end, even me, someone who is Dick Rider Supreme for it, was getting sick of the encounter rate and was tired of constantly fighting. I feel like the combat of this game would not be seen nearly as bad as it potentially is if it wasn't for how prevalent the combat encounters were. Your objectives are fairly straightforward: point A to point B, talking to person A to bring item to person B. Very rarely will you be completely directionless, and if you are, you can always go back to the detective agency and talk to Narumi, another one of those safety net features that I mentioned earlier. So the only thing gating you from breezing through the game is the high encounter rate. Also the kinda shitty final dungeon, but we'll get into that later. I can't help but be unable to shake this fear that people will misunderstand and misconstrue what I am saying about this game and why I like it so much, partially because of what I have said about other games in the past, and the weird preconceived perception of who I am as a person from a game of bad faith telephone that doesn't reflect reality at all. So let me explain my perspective to put my mind at ease. Yes, this game has its mechanical shortcomings and pretty glaring issues, things that I have even recently complained about to some extent in videos like my FF16 review, but in the case of this game, and by extension my deep dive through the action games of the 2000s, it has allowed me to gain an appreciation for ambitious but jank games that are trying their best and or experimenting with things even if they don't end up working. This isn't one of the biggest studios of today making one of the most expensive looking games with an hour worth of credits for people who worked on it, hiring people who have worked on some of the best action games ever made. This is a studio doing their second, technically third if you want to count both the Dreamcast version of Maken X and the PS2 remake of it, Maken Show, which only came out a few years before this. If you want to hold it up to its contemporaries and say that this game does not hold a candle to Devil May Cry 1, which came out 5 years earlier, while I think that's not fair, since these games have very different design goals and philosophies, it's not exactly untrue. But to really put this into perspective, Maken Show is easily, hands down, the worst feeling game I have played for the PlayStation 2 action game list. Maybe it gets better later on, but with the 2-ish hours I experienced of the game, it is the most unsatisfying and unappealing game feel I have encountered. It is up there with games like Shaq Fu 2 and Dino Crisis 3. So Devil Summoner 1 being their next attempt only 3 years later coming together to be something that I personally find pretty fun and satisfying is something to commend them for, and deserves me meeting it halfway to try and see what it was attempting to achieve. And what I think it features is hit feedback that is satisfying enough, playing as some of my favorite demons is extremely cool, the mix of real-time combat and menu management is super engaging, creating a really fun gameplay loop, something that is just asking to be copied and done better by more experienced combat and action game designers. Please, I want to see the Capcom Atlus team up for a Raidou 3. Make it happen. The closest thing we've gotten recently is actually a Capcom game, my game of the year for 2024, Kinitsugami. I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you love action games, tower defenses, and the blend of real-time and menu combat. The music is great, and the amount of hidden stuff that rewards exploration, leaving no stone left unturned with a story that goes in unpredictably crazy directions that you could have never expected, are all of the reasons why I enjoy a game like this in spite of all of its issues, while finding something like FF16 to be disappointing, even if it shares a lot of issues between the two. From here on out, I am going to be talking about some of my favorite story moments, so this is your last call for spoilers if you want to go in and play this game blind. 3, 2, 1, use the YouTube chapter feature to jump to the segment where I start talking about 2. The game has an excellent tone setter with mythologizing the Kuzunoha clan, which doubles over as your tutorial. You play as John Summoner, and his job is to maintain the balance as a disciple of Yatagarasu, who was too busy deck-locking 5-year-olds at locals to do it himself. The vibes of the nameless shrine are phenomenal. The opening hook of a girl coming into your agency asking you to kill her, only for a group of red-caped soldiers to appear and take her away, is one of the strongest openings I've encountered. This event really sets the vibe for the whole game, as you will go on to uncover a cursed family prophecy of possession and murder, discover 5G towers are turning people into monsters and harvesting said monsters from their bodies. Rasputin shows up, and if I had to count the amount of times I encountered Rasputin in a mid-2000s JRPG, I'd have 2 games, which, you know, isn't a lot, but it's more than you'd expect. Then it's revealed that he's actually a time-traveling Terminator. He has a cyborg body. The real Rasputin was in fact assassinated years ago. He's way goofier than you would expect someone with the title of the Dark Summoner. He speaks like his script is leftover lines from Dracula Flow. He fights you by summoning a bunch of Matryoshka dolls, requiring you to play a guessing game of which one he's hiding in. Then you have the second Japanese action game from the 2000s where your main character gets cursed, which drains your HP during gameplay and makes his skin blue. The general of the Japanese Imperial Army, Munakata, plans to make an army of undead super soldiers and is willing to sacrifice the capital and all of its population to do so. He then sends you to another dimension where you run into an edgier version of yourself, and when you get back, the possessed bastard summons the Japanese version of Liberty Prime, which is powered by a demon satellite in space. So you gotta figure out how to build a rocket ship to shoot your cat and a demon of your choice into space to blow it up before Yamato Prime makes the capital into a recreation of that one scene in Godzilla -1. You do this by translating Russian propulsion theory papers with Rasputin's disembodied head after you knock him out with the good old-fashioned bottle to the head while he's hitting on Tay at a bar. And if that wasn't insane enough, the final dungeon has Raidou go through the hallways of space and time, beaming the horrors of the world to come into his mind by touching these pillars like it's Akira.
Whoa, hey, that's pretty cool. Hey, do you mind beaming all of knowledge into my head for a second?
Dude just had every major world conflict knowledge beamed into his mind, and has the entire SMT series canon tied together with a multiverse theory, which created all of those massive timeline charts people would post on V back in the day. God, this final dungeon is a real ballbuster if you aren't prepared. If you are slightly underleveled, don't have a good lineup of demons that cover all of your bases, and don't have status healing items, you aren't going to have a fun time. I died way more times than I would like to admit in this segment because I got petrified and insta-killed after being hit once. It really could have done without the boss rush that makes you fight every single major boss of this game again. They're serviceable enough on their own, definitely one of the spots where the shallowness of combat really shows itself, and some fights just have too much fucking HP for their own good. It was bad enough the first time when you had to fight Misha Guji. I could have lived without having to do it a second time. Don't even get me started on the final boss and how agonizing it is. It's such an overly drawn out fight that it could even sour the experience of me, let alone anyone who wasn't already fully vibing with this game and its combat. The final phase of this checkpointless 3-phase boss fight took me almost 20 minutes the time I actually beat it. Granted, some of this was my fault because I think I probably could have had a better lineup of demons, but I seriously don't know why they made it have so much HP and make you deal so little damage to it. It's unfortunate that the final dungeon, while narratively really cool, is almost entirely just asset reuses like your Mega Man and Wily's Castle, except this takes you hours to get through. Also, if it wasn't already obvious enough, this isn't a deep summary of the events of this game. This was me highlighting most of the insane bits out of context. If you want the real meat and potatoes of the narrative of breaking free of the shackles of the past, being your own person and carving your own path the way you see fit, how grudges and resentment manifest hand in hand with the breaking down of communication of loved ones around you turns you into a monster, along with its commentary of military powers and their treatment of their soldiers and civilians as disposable means to an end, then you're gonna have to play the game for yourself. I've repeated it 1,000 times already at this point, but I like this game a lot, way more than I think your average person. So it won't surprise me if people come back to the comments of this video after trying out the game for themselves because of it, saying that they bounced off the game because the combat was boring and repetitive, the demon gameplay is shallow as shit, the detective work is half-baked, amounting to just running around, talking to all of the named NPCs scattered amongst the overworld until they are pointing you in the right direction, but that's fine. It's an experience I find unique and like. It's a flawed but extremely enjoyable game, which I think sums up Atlus games perfectly. They aren't perfect, but nothing is, and acknowledging that they aren't doesn't take away from the fact games like Nocturne still have some of the most rewarding party building in a JRPG, or that Persona 4 has one of my favorite casts ever that hit me at a really formative time in my life right before entering high school, or that this game is one of the most insanely stylish and batshit insane stories you can play. Atlus would go on to take everything they learned from this game and its shortcomings to return with a revitalized sequel 2 years later with Devil Summoner 2: Raidou Kuzunoha vs. King Abaddon. Raidou 2 is such an interesting game. I wanted to draw a comparison to other franchises to highlight the evolution between installments, but there really isn't a perfect analog. It isn't exactly like Yakuza 1 to 2. It does do the whole expanding on the same map, so it's about 1.5 to 2 times the size of the first game, but there is so many system overhauls and complete changing of systems that comparison falls apart. I guess the closest thing is the jump from Sly Cooper 1 to Sly 2. It takes a lot of the ideas and general systems, but goes in its own direction with things. There will be stuff from the first game you potentially liked, but won't be found here, and new stuff you might potentially not like that wasn't present in the first game. I think Raidou 2 is fantastic. It's a game that is equally great compared to the first one, but also equally flawed for completely different reasons. The game is massive. The amount of content they packed into this single game is staggering, considering how much of it you don't have to engage with at all to hit credits. Truly a type of game that does not get made anymore, where the developers put so much love and care into the game, but also the freedom to allow the player to completely miss it. Maybe a little too much freedom and esotericism in some places, but it's always a breath of fresh air to remember games like this because they have a very organic feel to them. These things aren't here to farm engagement in the same way games are doing it now. Obviously, games have always been designed to keep players playing for as long as humanly possible. The war of attrition versus refund windows for storefronts has been an ongoing battle since the dawn of video games. But in the context of Raidou 2, it's look at this cool stuff you can do instead of fucking login bonuses and dailies for your second job slop eating games. The design doesn't feel like it's based entirely around the existence of the concept of FOMO. Let's take it from the top because we have a lot to cover and certain mechanics are inevitably going to lead me into more long-winded tangents. The game actually rewards you for having save data from the first game, which I always appreciate when a game does this. The biggest thing is that a bunch of demons you recruit in the first game will remember you from your Soulless Army adventure and automatically join your party. More games besides Yakuza need to keep this feature alive. It's always nice to see developers give extra goodies to loyal fans who play all of their games. Graphically, Raidou 2 has a noticeable amount of enhancements compared to the first game. Higher quality models and texture resolution all around. Reused areas look about the same since they are using pre-rendered backgrounds, but you can tell in close-ups that there were improvements in the 2 years between both games. Some characters look different, and I chalk this up to the evolution of Kaneko's art style, and sadly I don't like how Raidou and Tai look in this game. There is something about them in the CGI cutscenes that just looks off. Tai looks almost completely different, and the facial proportions for Raidou compared to his appearance in 1 is super jarring. The larger nose, brighter eye color no matter the lighting context, the stronger highlight on his chin to further pronounce his lower lip, while also making his mouth wider and angled downward makes him almost look like a completely different person in Raidou's clothing. It gives him this almost frog-like appearance to me and gets rid of a lot of what I gushed about in Devil Summoners 1 segment with character designs and drawing parallels to Akio Sugino's art. It's weird because Narumi looks fine. He looks pretty much the same outside of his new suit, which, wait a minute.
Pussy!
I really like the designs for the new characters, but there is something about Raidou and Tai that just feels off. The presentation for combat took both a massive step up and a massive step in a different direction. Instead of the fixed camera angle dioramas from the first game, you are now fighting enemies in much larger boxes with a camera angle facing it head on. Team attacks got much more elaborate animations that look super cool, and there is this stylish finisher every time you end a major fight. Combat got a massive overhaul in this game, and it is where we will be spending most of our non-spoiler talk time about it. I overall like the combat of Devil Summoner 2, but there is something that does make me sad that the specifics of 1's gameplay that are going to end up being left by the wayside for this direction instead of building on that iteration. It's much faster and smoother, giving Raidou a lot more nimble feel to his gameplay. Menus don't feel as responsive and snappy compared to the first game, but this will only really be noticeable if you're like me and trying to input buffer command menus while playing extremely reckless. Eventually, I stopped noticing this after I spent nearly double the amount of time playing 2 compared to 1. The menuing and turn-based influences have been shifted to mostly the start of combat. For comparison, when you would get into a fight in Devil Summoner 1, you'd be thrown into the thick of things and whatever demon you had set to default would just be shat out next to you. In Devil Summoner 2, you load into the turn-based combat-like formation with the command menu popping up offering you to swap out your demons, select what spells you want them to start the combat combat with and who to target. Gone are the combat natures, and instead opts in for more direct control, telling your demons to repeat the same spells over and over again by pressing triangle on the highlighted spell, placing the spinning circle on it. It initially seems like the game has a lot more of a blend of menuing and real-time combat, but after a while it actually becomes way less compared to the first game. The two big shakeups to combat is that you now control two demons at the same time, and that individual demons no longer have mana bars of their own. Instead, everything is fed into your singular mag meter. Controlling two demons at once isn't really that much different outside of one facet that doesn't feel super smooth. This would be one thing to change and improve on with an eventual remaster remake of the second game if the first game's does well enough. When combat starts and you command each of your demons to do specific things, you get to do target selection back to back. When you press R2 to bring up their command menus in combat, it doesn't feel nearly as smooth, since if you want to have both demons target the same guy, you have to command one, the menu will then close, and then you have to reopen it and select the second demon and do the same thing. A simple solution for this is to click left or right on the D-pad twice, which normally one press cycles between either demon, so two presses would highlight both of them and be able to command them to target the same enemy. For the change from mana to mag, it seems like to streamline the experience, but in the end it kinda waters down the combat to some extent. It does kill one bad habit I always have in SMT games, which is have a low-level heal battery in my party, the HM slave, but instead of surf and cut, it just spams Dia at a low cost. In the first game, I always kept Alp with me for this purpose, since I would no matter what always have a pagan demon to read minds, and a demon that could always heal me at a cheap cost, instead of wasting precious combat mana with other demons that also can heal. I don't know if this was the intention with the change, since I don't know how popular doing this is, and I know how bad of a strat it can be, but I can't help but doing it since I eventually always just stick to a few really strong demons by the end game. For positive changes, it removes the summon costs for demons from the first game, so you are allowed to experiment with them much more freely. This does mean they did remove the ability to trade demons in at the soda shop for mag, since mag is now mana instead of a summon currency. But I don't know why they got rid of some mechanics like being able to buy sodas from the store that buff you, or demon sacrifice fusions that were present in the first game. Now there is no reason to go to the soda joint outside of story reasons unless you want to get some tutorial refreshers, and now you run into the issue that the first game worked around, where you have demons that have been power crept but they don't fuse into anything useful, so you just end up releasing them back out into the wild. You gain mag from hitting stunned enemies that have been hit by their matching weaknesses. It makes combat boil down to set each of your demons to spam whatever the target's weakness is and stun lock them to death. This is what I meant earlier with the way that command menus are set up, and how combat initiates makes it seem like the game is much more of a blend of the two gameplay types compared to the first one. But after you realize this is all you have to do, it quickly becomes interface with the menus as little as possible and mash on stun-locked demons. The amount of mag you get back is often very little, and the mag refill items are extremely rare to my knowledge. So unless you have one of these swords with mag regen passives, or if you are the type of player to stockpile and save for later, then you won't be casting as many spells as you'd like. It's just kinda odd that even physical spells use mag when they usually use HP to be their casting cost. If it at least did this, there would be some more trade-off than just, do you want to spend mag, yes, no. The combat is still fun and enjoyable, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that something about this change makes it feel a little more mindless for some reason compared to the first game. Which is a weird thing to say considering how basic and kind of mindless the first game already was. It's the biggest criticism against it, but this game, while expounding upon things, has this watered down feel. Your main melee combo has been sped up and expanded upon with more than 3 slashes now. You aren't doing shotgun jump cancels and 2 flying guard like it's DMC, but I think it will feel much better to people who bounced off the first game's combat. Besides being faster, your melee attacks don't feel as stiff, like they are locking you in place as much compared to the first game. You lose the charge spin from the first game, the animation is still there in your extended main melee combo, but in place of it is these new special moves on triangle. Initially, it's this Virgil rapid slash style attack until you eventually unlock sword forging again, which is another system that has got reworked and expanded on. Sword forging now uses materials and sword recipes instead of fusing them with your demons like in the first game. You get these materials from exploring, randomly given when maxing out loyalty from your demons, and infusing maxed loyalty demons away. There are 3 sub-sword types now: sword, spear, and axe. Each sword has a passive, and a lot of the really strong sword passives have massive game-altering abilities that are super impactful. The one I rocked for most of the game is a sword that refunds half of your mag after every combat encounter. The special moves on triangle are dictated by which subtype of sword you have. With spears, it's a million stab move. With axes, you do a fell cleave like you just activated inner release in FF14. It's a neat system, but some of the downsides that come with it are how it impacts and influences other mechanics. For example, one of the big changes is that the team-up attacks from the first game are no longer tied to you and your demon hitting an enemy's weak point until your demon's health bar glows green. These are now spells that take up a slot in your respective demon's move list, which means they have to even have one in the first place, and most demons do not. Visually, they look great, but sadly they are tied to each of the 3 weapon types, meaning that if you have an axe-type sword equipped, you aren't able to use the team-up attacks that require a sword subtype or a spear subtype. You can only swap your equipped sword when out of combat in the menu, which gets repetitive and cumbersome, along with the fact you aren't going to know what you are up against and what they are weak to in the context of random battles or in a context of a first-time playthrough. It's also worth mentioning that your demons can't even use all of the spells they have access to in any given combat encounter. For some reason, they can only use a few of them, which you have to select in the status menu, and I'm not even sure that this is a thing that the game even mentions you have to and can do. So these end up getting ignored more than they would have if they did not have the restriction, or if they at the very least allowed you to swap the swords at the start of combat when you're lined up with your demons before you initiate. That would be the ideal best version of this, allow you to only change at the start so there is still some planning and risk versus reward, or just simply allow you to change it anytime during combat. This issue isn't even taking into account that later in the game you are given a plot-relevant blade that will auto-equip at the start of every fight it's needed. It's good that they had the foresight to do this, otherwise it would be a nightmare and you'd be trapped in unwinnable fights, but it still means you have to swap back to your much better sword after every single one of these plot-relevant battles, because by the time you get the sword, it is already worse than something I had for like 10 hours. The controls of the game were reworked, which made this playthrough initially somewhat awkward after playing 30 hours straight of Devil Summoner 1, then booting up 2 with a different layout with no way to remap it. The specifics of the changes aren't that important outside of one. Block was moved from X to L1, as X now features the newly added dodge roll. Blocking was insanely broken in the first game since you would not be affected by status ailments as long as you had your sword up. Honestly, it's still broken here, but the dodge makes your movement feel a lot more active and allows you to avoid even more damage than blocking already did. With how jank the AoE spell hitboxes are, as they tend to linger way past their visual indication, it's good to have this dodge, though you do have to train yourself to wait a second or two after those abilities disappear, because if you roll right back at the enemies, you are going to be hit with those status effects when you otherwise should not have. Spells like Dormina and Mare and Karen seem to be the biggest offenders of this, along with the big laser attacks from bosses. It's better to just play ultra safe with those and keep your distance and demons hidden by your side so you or they don't randomly get hit, resulting in you either losing half of your mana, getting your demon sealed, or some other effects that a lot of these beams tend to have. With the new camera angle and larger arena size, it's very easy for demons to be caught out of your camera range and shoot you from off screen. This also happens a lot because of the new gimmick many demons have, which is that they love to teleport around. This is dealt with by using your gun, which stuns enemies if you hit them enough times. It is your best method of dealing with this because your demon AI is too slow and stupid to be able to fight against enemies that constantly do this. If you have them set to repeating a spell while enemies are teleporting around, they will continuously shoot off into the empty air and waste all of your mag. This doesn't seem to work against major bosses, so fights like the Pale Rider are some of the worst and most frustrating in the game. When bosses start teleporting around a shit ton, it just feels like they are wasting your time because of how little you can land hits on them. Your pistol now has unlimited ammo compared to the eventual 99 cap for each bullet in the first game, but you have to stop and reload after firing 6 shots. This means they also removed the elemental bullets that you had to pause and reload to switch to. Elemental shots are still functionally in the game, it is just they have now been moved to a buff spell that demons can have in their move list, which they can apply to you for a limited amount of time. They even made a sword variation for these spells, so you can get flame swords, lightning swords, ice swords, and you get the idea. While a neat concept, I don't really like the change to bullets. I rarely used it by virtue of the fact that a lot of the demons I had in my party over the course of the game simply did not have these spells. If they did, I would often fuse them away after their loyalty maxed, but before I leveled them up enough to get said spell unlocked. As I kept fusing more and more powerful demons, I ended up electing to have them inherit extremely powerful spells like Glacial Blast and Hellfire over a 5-second buff that might not even be able to do anything because the enemy's null gun. There is also the mechanical facet I should mention that demons can only have one buff active at a time. I discovered this while trying to have Warcry, the physical damage up buff, active, while also having null physical on, so I would not get turned to stone by the boss's attacks if they somehow clipped me. These buffs are shown in the top left corner with your unit's health bars, so if you try to cast 2 back to back, they will only keep the last one. Each demon can have a buff active, but neither demon can have multiple at once. Though I'm not entirely sure how this factors in for buffs that last the entire duration of a combat encounter, there really isn't any indicator of here are all the buffs you have right now and here is how they modify your stats, like other games do. Instead of capturing enemies in a very Pokemon fashion with hitting weak points and forcing them into your tubes while stunned, Devil Summoner 2 elected to bring back demon negotiation. I am of two minds about this system. On one hand, it's iconic and part of the SMT experience. It's part of what people come to these games for. On the other hand, it often felt like a random system that made little sense, where you could not tell why the same answer with the same demon would not result in the same outcome twice in a row. Sometimes they'll swoon at your answers, and other times they'll get so offended they'll try to bite your head off. This could be seen as trying to capture the trickster aspect of demons, but in reality it just feels like you need outside explanations and answers because they make little sense themselves within the game. It limits you to recruiting one demon per encounter. This may not sound like that big of a deal coming from the standard turn-based SMT games, but in the first Devil Summoner Raidou game, you were able to recruit as many as you could fit into your pocket per battle. If you fail to negotiate but don't make them leave, which sometimes ends the full encounter but not always, and I couldn't tell why that's the case, you just lose the ability to re-attempt to negotiate. They are giving you the cold shoulder. I find this frustrating because this wasn't an issue in the first game, and just something to bust your balls when you want to get a specific demon. Yes, I spent like 2+ hours trying to get Mizuki and Gozuki to match the opening cinematic, and yes, I am salty as fuck it took me that long to recruit this Texas Roadhouse meal waiting to happen. One of the things that helps your negotiation skills is the active demons you have on the field. Each demon has one of the handful of negotiation personality types, which can be used to help you convince demons to join your team. It's one of the multiple things in this game to further characterize demons. I like that they went to the lengths to personalize each and every demon with a little jig, a message they can leave you after you fuse them with max loyalty, along with the multiple unique dialogue interactions that can be had with specific demons throughout the game, though doing these will result in your target leaving after the end of the conversation, so if you are expecting to see these scenes then have them join your party, you will be sorely mistaken. For the actual negotiation enhancers themselves, it just amounts to matching the type of response they need, and the game will tell you that negotiations have improved. It gets extremely repetitive really fast, as you have to mash through the same dialogue over and over again, and hitting sweet talk to see your demons do the little Fortnite emote and hoping that was enough to get them to join your team. The negotiation system in general begins to get pretty repetitive in this game, since you can get sucked into conversations against your will by demons and they can just drone on and on. It's the worst when some low-level shitters in an area you are just passing through does this and wastes even more time than the already plentiful random battles do. If this happens in a fight where you want to recruit another demon and they are cock-blocking you, then you better hope you piss them off enough to fight you instead of leaving and ending the encounter. While trying to dance around story spoilers, luck plays a massive role in this game, and the way it integrates mechanically to gamify and bridge the gap between story and gameplay, you have these roulettes that will happen at the start of combat encounters triggered by bosses, or eventually be able to be triggered by yourself. In the opening hours of the game, you'll get real familiar with the nastier effects of bad luck in the bad luck roulettes. These range from things like enemies are enraged so you can't recruit them, your attacks have a chance of missing, certain demon orders are sealed so you can't summon them. Some of the late game bosses have a few that are really funny if they land on them, as they troll the player in a way that, while feeling really mean, I can't help but go, you got me, that's funny, okay, I can't be too mad about this. I'm not gonna spoil what these are if you plan to play the game for yourself, yourself, just know you'll have something to look forward to. There are positive roulettes when luck is shining on you, which give you good effects like increasing crit rate, better chances with negotiation, specific demon orders dealing more damage, you get more items, money, XP, loyalty, etc. Eventually you'll get a consumable item that will allow you to initiate these whenever you want, but they are pretty limited but not the hardest to come by, so you don't have to worry too much about stockpiling them until they're really needed. It's such a creative way to gamify luck as a core mechanic. I just wish there were more roulette options because the negative ones could be way meaner and the positive ones don't feel nearly as good, but that's also kind of the point. The luck of the draw and all that jazz. For quality of life changes from the first game, your HQ now allows you to rest, which fully heals you and your demons, so you no longer have to be shelling out money to heal at the lab, which was extremely out of the way to get to, which leads to the next major improvement, the ability to teleport to the Goma Den at any save point in the game, so you don't have to be inconvenienced and walk your goofy ass all the way back to town just to go to the shop, then go to the Goma Den if you want to fuse, clear up your team spaces, or get healed. This cuts down so much on wasted time and makes fusing so much easier. The game has so many more demons in it compared to the first one, and Atlus made sure that your ass was gonna see them. When your summoner rep ranks up, it no longer requires you to go back to the nameless shrine and talk to the maiden to rank up and receive new tubes. Now it just happens in the post-fight screen and the new tubes are plopped right into your lap. You can get up to 20 tubes in this game, not that you'd ever really find yourself needing that many demons at once, but if you want them, then you gotta focus on leveling up your loyalty every chance you get. There's even a elaborate breakdown in a guide that I will link in the description below. It's organized so you can avoid spoilers but also see how the best way to tackle this. Instead of having to keep swapping to a solo demon to interact with the red crystals that are housing items and then right back to Raidou after opening them, Devil Summoner 2 allows you to simply interact with them as long as a demon is summoned out and they will open it for you without the extra hassle of menu tedium. Apparently, as mentioned in that guide I just talked about, what you get from these is dependent on what demon you have summoned, but I never noticed this. I don't think this is even explained, so that's something I guess to take into account, but ultimately I didn't think it mattered. But I can say for certain this might be why I had so few mag healing items. I always appreciate it that in a long JRPG that has a lot of moving parts and phrases, they give you a ton of notes to check back on so you can refresh yourself at any given moment and won't be confused at what's going on. Maybe they go a bit too overboard in this game as every chapter starts with this really handholdy recap of what just happened, but there is enough vague concepts that you are juggling with gods and their powers and the organizations that answer to them that I guess they really did not want the player to be lost in the sauce when talking about luck and the plenty of other bullshit the game will delve into. While not a quality of life change per se, they did make it so you no longer have random battles in the major cities of the game. You are able to freely and safely roam around the non-dungeon areas without being stopped every 2 feet to fight some random shit mob. This speeds up exploration and reduces the tedium this game could potentially have by a magnitude you cannot comprehend. This game is massive without these encounters. It's already about double the length of the first game, so if random encounters did work like they did in the first game, it would be an agonizing experience in 2. The only real downside is that since demon encounters are relegated to the dungeons of the game, outside of the few narrative moments where main towns can have combat, you are much more likely to run into situations where you don't have the right demon for the overworld contextual thing you need to push the plot forward, explore, or get special items. In my case, I often found myself not having a pagan demon I needed to read minds, and because of the changes from mana to mag, I did not have my low-level Alp heal battery that fits this criteria. Both games are really good about having demons you can recruit if there is a roadblock in the area needed to be cleared to progress. It's just an unfortunate casualty in the overworld and in main towns for the much more streamlined experience to explore them. You're just gonna have to accept that you might run into a time or two where you will need to keep a really weak demon around to cover all of the demon orders, or go spend money to summon a low-level one from the compendium that fits the criteria but ditch them after. On the topic of demon order overworld abilities, there are a few new ones that were added to introduce new methods of exploration. Wind demons can now interact with these cyclone launch pads, which will send you to different parts of a given area. In some cases, like in the Tento Woods, it introduces an entirely optional little puzzle area for extra goodies and materials to loot. The coolest one, in my opinion, is that skill demons can now transform Raidou into different people and animals. It's only used a few times in the main story itself, but there are a lot of places that you can explore, like using the dog transformation, which functions like sneak in the first game. One thing about how exploration, puzzles, and demon abilities changed in this game is that there is zero reason to do demon soloing compared to Devil Summoner 1. In the first game, you'd be doing it all the time, but it's rarely needed in 2 since everything revolves around Raidou for exploration. Wind Demon Kamikazes now takes place of flying, which was used in places like the riverbank and Dark Fukagawa-cho, and you don't really get stuff like the tower puzzles from 1, where you'd have to move both you and your demons around these sliding platforms to make progress. In the Tento Woods, you could find this broken bridge. If this was Raidou 1, you would send a demon that could fly across the gap to explore the other side. Instead, this is gated until you are able to fix the bridge later in the game so Raidou can cross it. I really hate pretty much every dungeon in this game. The dungeons in Raidou 1 weren't exactly anything to write home about. A lot of them were just evil versions of the towns you were already exploring and spending all of your time in. There were a few unique ones like the factory dungeon or the military base. I think they served their purpose well enough to get the job done, but most of the dungeons in Devil Summoner 2 are my least favorite type of SMT dungeons. I don't give a shit if this makes me a casual or sacrilege to think, but I really do not fuck with the step on the wrong tile and get teleported somewhere else type dungeons. Shit like the final floors of the Tower of Kagetsuchi from Nocturne. If it's not that, then it's like the vortexes in the Kalpa where you need specific moon phases to make the correct progress to get teleported to the right room. So you just have to run in place until you have the phase you need. My least favorite were the dungeons that not only had the teleporting tiles, but you had to enter hallways from different angles to make the paths shift to the right one. With how high the encounter rate is in games like this, it just feels like such a time waster and super hard for me to get my bearings because you take 2 steps, get teleported somewhere else, then take 2 more steps trying to figure out where you need to go, only to get sucked into a minute-plus random battle, then you get out and forget which path you were trying to map out in your head. I'd much rather have stuff that requires you and your demon to split up and work together, like the dungeon puzzles in the first game compared to this. They do this a few times, but not nearly enough compared to the oopsie doopsie, you stepped on the wrong tile, enjoy being sent 20 miles away, and the 30 random battles you're gonna have to crawl through unless you want to spend a repulse water, which we already talked about its issues in the first game's segment. The only time you truly have to go solo for more than 2 seconds is for these barrier breaking minigames. In the first game, you'd have these areas only accessible to demons, so you'd have to send your strongest or most useful one into said area, and you'd have them fight mini-bosses, collect items, and solve puzzles. In Devil Summoner 2, these walls have been reworked to need specific demons like a certain order or a specific stat number, kinda like the Doors of Might in the Kalpa of SMT 3. You go into these areas, you walk a few feet until you see these brown floating stones, and then you do a button mashing minigame until it breaks. In my near 50-hour playthrough where I didn't even do everything because I wanted to get this video out at a reasonable time and it's already past the point of the remake coming out, I did not have a single fight as a solo demon, and I think that sucks. Others probably found this boring and shallow in the first game, but I really liked playing as the iconic demons of this series that I know and love. Side quests are much more formal in Devil Summoner 2. In the first game, it was akin to Yakuza 1, where these were unmarked events you just had to know about and talk to random NPCs, nameless, faceless NPCs in some cases, in order to do them. Like how you had to track down and talk to Detective Kazama in each chapter to get these specific items to eventually trigger the encounter with Raiho, or how you had to find this guy peeping on the bathhouse only to find out that it was actually a demon in a human disguise. 2 replaces the story summaries that the case file tab used in the first game and puts these side quests as an itemized list here instead. This is one of the odd things about Devil Summoner 2 and quality of life features, where a bunch of the systems from 1 either got streamlined or made way less of a hassle to do because it was stupid how they had them designed originally, but for 2's new systems, they have those same awkward, cumbersome, and out-of-the-way issues as stuff in the first game. In the contexts of side quests, you can only accept 1 side quest at a time from your HQ, despite the fact that you have to go all over town to solve them. If 2 are in the same location, you have to initiate 1, solve it, go back to the HQ and turn it in if it involves a requested item of some kind. If it's the ones where you talk to someone or do a fight, it still requires you to go back after getting the case closed message to the HQ to start the second second quest and then travel right back to the location you were just at. Raidou is single-handedly funding the Tokyo rail system with the amount of tram fare he has to pay before getting the free pass from an optional side quest 3/4 of the way through the game, where being able to teleport to the Gomaden at every save point cuts down on so much needless overworld backtracking. This adds that tedium right back and then some. How you have to initiate some of these quests is even more baffling. There are a bunch that require you to talk to named NPCs of this game, mostly people returning from Devil Summoner 1. You go up to them, they say hi if they have not shown up in the main story, and ask you how you've been since fighting the Solus army. They'll tell you how they have a case or two for you that needs solving, your file is updated, then you have to teleport back to HQ, go into the menu, initiate them. Some of these require you to go right back and talk to said person to get further details on the case after they just gave you said case, so this requires you to go to locations, talk to them, go back to the agency, initiate the quest, then go right back to the first place, which doesn't even take into account what they ask you to do. Why would they implement such a simple system like this? Why do you possibly need to go back and forth up to 3 times or more when they could simply tell you right there and have access to all of your current files in your menu? I could understand that if some of them were dropped off after clearing a specific tier or completing some specific quests that need others as a chain, that you would have to go back to HQ, but this is absurd. It's such a poorly thought out implementation that it screams, "Fix me, please fix me," in a potential remake if the first one does well enough. The side quests themselves range in quality. There are a decent amount of really basic ones that are forgettable or suck. Stuff like bring me my 5 ship potatoes from the local market, trade in weaker healing items to get stronger ones, bring me a specific demon or bring me a specific demon with a specific move or stat number. The best ones are the side quests with a little story, like the one where you have to photograph the famous actress. There are a bunch of ones that give you funny, unique encounters which unlock special demons you'd otherwise miss. Raidou is much easier to get in this game by comparison. To get sea travel back from the first game is even a side quest which is missable for most of the game, so if you're planning on playing this after this video, make sure that you do that quest as soon as possible. I believe it shows up in like chapter 2 or 3. The final mechanic I've been dancing around talking about is the biggest difference in this game that sets Devil Summoner 2's experience apart from 1's besides the combat changes. The reintroduction of the iconic alignment system. Law and Chaos are back, baby, and they have such a cool integration in this game. But to talk about and explain them, I have to spoil some stuff. No story specifics, but I do think it's a mechanic that is cool enough that if you wanted to experience how it interacts with the story blind, that it is worth skipping over, and I will put a light spoiler warning here before the major spoiler warning later, where I get right into talking about the nitty-gritties of the story. Here is your first warning. So the way that alignment works in this game is that you are given dialogue options throughout the story that will make your controller vibrate. When you feel this, that means your answer will either give you points towards law or chaos. The way you tell what your alignment currently is one of the most esoteric things I have ever seen. This is the type of shit you'd expect from Demon Souls era From Software. When traversing the big overworld map, the way your little Raidou Monopoly board game piece moves is how you tell your alignment. If your torso spins clockwise, you are law. If it spins counterclockwise, you are chaos. If it wiggles back and forth but does not rotate, then you are neutral. I love esoteric design like this, at least when I'm able to look up how to confirm this, because I don't know how you figure out a ton of shit in this game without a guide handy. Seriously, that guide I linked to on GameFAQs has some breakdowns for things like which demons give you the most loyalty per kill and has an equation for it. Not that it's a particularly complex equation, but the fact that some dude was obsessed about this game enough to figure this shit out and catalog it for the future is insane to me. Dedication like that is a flavor of neurodivergence I sadly did not spec into at birth. I went for the video editing and stop motion loadout. One thing I could appreciate about this game's esoteric design is that it feels like it's there for the sake of it. It's there because some developer on the staff thought it was cool and would lead to giving the player a specific experience that feels unique. Nowadays, it almost feels like game devs are in on the joke, kind of like how game Easter eggs have gotten worse over time in my opinion. They are trying to emulate stuff like this from this era or earlier that they grew up with, or because From Software did it 10 years ago, in a way that doesn't feel organic or in some cases genuine. In modern games, stuff like this often feels like it exists for real cynical reasons, with the idea that they are being made for the purpose of being shared in Twitter posts, Reddit threads as they are turned into clips for your short-form video sharing platform of choice. Or maybe it's for their dogshit ARG, which again feeds into that free marketing they're trying to get, all so they can maximize player engagement so some jack-off in a boardroom can bust a nut at the player engagement numbers before he goes to steal breast milk from the employee fridge. Like, how many games can you think of that came out recently that felt like a repackaging of Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It with a slight twist for the millionth time so it can get popular with streamers and VTubers and they can make $1 trillion off of a basic-ass low-effort asset flip? The most interesting part of the alignment system is how it impacts the story. Since this isn't a remake the world in your image type game, being law or chaos doesn't change about 99% of how the story plays out. The biggest differences you'll see outside of the endings is some side quests are locked behind specific alignments, and a few bosses are different depending on if you are law or chaos at that point. And when I say a few, I mean like 3 tops if I'm remembering correctly. Now, some may be mad at this or find it disappointing or disinteresting as it feels like your choices don't matter, that it only really means something at the very end of the game when you have your final alignment locking scene in the final dungeon of the game, whereas in other games like SMT4 you are locked in much earlier, therefore you get to see much more of how the story and the game plays out from your choice. But because of this approach, it has the freedom to allow for an exploration of these themes in a way you can't do in other SMT entries. There are still dialogue differences between each of your answers. Sure, the outcome of events won't vastly change in most places, but the character interactions and the dialogue between these outcomes is different. You do see reactions. You do see how other characters react to your choices. So while person A will still ultimately go to location B no matter what you say, their outlook, their response, and their emotions can be completely different depending on what you're telling them. To me, that is a meaningful choice with meaningful differences. Different dialogue and different reactions leads to different implications for narrative outcomes. It's why I say the story of Nier is fundamentally different whether you play father or brother Nier, despite the actual events being one for one the same. Your choices in this game are defined in the context of how Raidou carries himself and views the world, which if you really want to boil it down, that's how it works in every game. But here it isn't that baby should have been stronger if it didn't want me to throw it into the wood chipper for chaos, and
slavery's actually really epic and is the key to world peace. If we just get rid of human will and make everyone a mindless drone, there will be no conflict
for law, or both of these guys are fucking insane, and God should also fuck off and stop interfering with humanity and let us do our own thing for neutral. It's how Raidou, and by extension the player, interpret and act upon the Kuzunoha code. To give an example of how the average alignment choice works in Devil Summoner 2, a character in Chapter 3 asks you how you view your demons. You can say that you treat them as tools or that you treat them as comrades. Another great example is a story Narumi tells you while drinking one night. It's about a group of immigrants that move into a village who have the ability to smith iron ore back when humans were not advanced enough to see this as anything other than magic. While the village prospered from the advancements the iron ore inventions brought and selling them brought, all thanks to the immigrants did not look like normal people. So eventually the neighboring villages started to make a stink. The relationship between the villagers and the immigrants started to sour. The villagers avoided them out of fear of association. The leader of the village could no longer sit on the fence about this situation and chose to cast the immigrants out into the mountains. To keep his villagers, or any villagers from other locations, from following these immigrants up into the mountains, he began to spread a rumor about a mountain curse. Narumi sees this as, while the immigrants were exiled, they were able to live peaceful lives in the mountains thanks to the choices the village leader made. Because of those rumors, they would not have been harmed by outsiders or anyone else because they were different. He ends the story by asking you what you would do as the village leader. I went with the find a way to coexist option. Stand up for them as a part of your village, that just because they are different does not mean they should not be treated equally. Without it outright going, your choice is fucking stupid and here's why, despite both answers having a retort following them, which I think would piss off a lot of players, feeling that the game is blaming you for your choice that they made you pick and that you are somehow a bad person for doing so. It instead gives you a different perspective on the situation and how these choices can be interpreted differently, often in a negative way, even if you set out with the best intentions. Narumi remarks that you probably said this on the basis that discrimination is wrong, but then he asks what you'd think if the leader chose this option reason for a different motive than yours? What if the leader only did this to protect the village's source of income? The immigrants would be kept around and continued to be treated as second-class citizens, used for their smithing iron skills, and how cruel that would be. Seeing it as being cold-hearted to their acts of cruelty to maintain the status quo. If you want a really uncharitable interpretation of what Narumi is saying here, he is basically contorting the story in a way where the segregation and exile of these immigrants is justified because otherwise they would still be discriminated against if they stayed. It was actually a good thing that they were forced out of their homes and made to live on a mountain. I don't think that's what they're trying to say here. It's not trying to catch you in a gotcha. While it's somewhat playing both sides, it seems like it's trying to show you that no matter how good your intentions are, not everyone is going to do that for that reason or see what you are doing for that reason. But that doesn't make it wrong to think idealistically like the way you are and still try to find a better way regardless. When you view the conversation like this, it's such a nice bit of dialogue that does tie back into the main story of the game and the dilemma you'll be faced with in some ways that I can't get into specifics of now because of spoilers. All of your choices are generally like this, showing how Raidou operates to other people and how he approaches problem-solving solutions. Chaos is not might makes right, it's Raidou is much more hedonistic. He is an individual that will go against his prime directive to either suit himself or do what he thinks is right. He is not bound by tradition. He is still the man who gave his name up at the start of the first game to take the title of the 14th Raidou Kuzunoha. It does, as a result, end up making him come off a bit more brash but personable. He feels less like a silent self-insert. Sometimes it does make him seem like a bit too much of a selfish asshole for my liking, but you are constantly making alignment decisions throughout the game, so you don't always have to go pure chaos or pure law to get the outcome you want. It's a much less frustrating implementation of Paragon and Renegade from Mass Effect, if a bit toned down on the Renegade side. Raidou isn't blasting reporters with a swanton bomb, but maybe he should have if he wanted to stop all of those cataclysms earlier than he did. That's not even mentioning the unintentional exploits where you can farm which alignment you want before going to the final lock, so you really can play the game however you want to get whichever ending you wish. The game doesn't outright say it, but that guide I referenced showed the points that you get towards each alignment per answer, so depending on what you say in what sequences, sometimes it can really rubber band you right back to the other side. If you were answering a ton of options as chaos, but choose one of these pivotal ones as law, it'll give you way more law points because you were chaos up until that point. Law in this game isn't hollow peace through authoritarian subservitude via godly intervention, it's Raidou following the Kuzunoha code to a T. He has inherited the title and the mantle of Raidou, and he plans not to disappoint the clan or his ancestors. Calling him a robot isn't really the right term here, but the law version of Raidou is much more of a rule follower and a bit detached as an individual person. He's much more aloof and distant, definitely feeling more aura farmer as law. He's what you would imagine a dude trying to be a chivalrous knight would be like if he worked for a weird secret cult that protects the world. He's always on in a similar way that being a soldier is described in games like Metal Gear Solid. Chaos Raidou still maintains his individuality, where Law Raidou feels like he views the world strictly through the idealized lens of how it would fit into the Kuzunoha code. He is a protector, and he must act as such. Like in all of these games, neutral feels like the best way to approach role-playing the character throughout the game. The perfect blend of knowing when to follow the rules and when to break them because it can ultimately halt progress and better outcomes. A character with boundless empathy that wants to help anyone and everyone no matter their past transgressions. The game talks a lot about hope, the future, and saviors, and this approach feels the most fitting for that narrative as it's the most Christ-like approach to things. I think the way alignment is approached and written in this game is done so well that it actually made me not sure which answer was which at times. Not in a frustrating way that doesn't make sense and feels poorly written, but more in a, they obfuscated it enough that I'm no longer seeing it as a video game mechanic it secretly is keeping tallies of on the back end, but as wanting me to stop and think and pick how I truly feel is right. It actually had me picking law alignment answers for once, when I struggle to take law as an option seriously in other SMT titles once it stops being about the equality of man and more about how Yahweh or whatever flavor of God/almighty being is going to make me their flesh puppet for their amusement today, all for the sake of peace peace. From here on out will be the spoiler zone for the story. If you don't want to know anything and everything about both of these games' narratives before playing them for yourself, then use the YouTube chapter feature to jump to the end where I talk about my thoughts and feelings on the first game's remake. Are they gone? Good. Okay, so first things first. If you are one of those people who memes about Yakuza 5 for the whole Yume thing, then you are going to have a field day with this one. Like I mentioned earlier, luck is a core pillar of this game's themes and narrative, and they must say the word luck 30,000 times in this game. I have never seen a game go to such lengths to set up nearly every conversation to have the person you are talking to bring up luck at least once. It has invaded my brain so much that I can no longer look at this word the same. When I talk to regular people outside and they say the word luck, it's like my UNATCO kill phrase is activated. One thing that I really dislike about this game's story is how Tay is handled for a good majority of the game. She was a sidekick, somewhat comic relief in Devil Summoner 1, as she had to keep fainting so she would not witness the supernatural shit that the average person isn't supposed to know about. But in this game, they give her a gimmick where every time you see her, she asks you what her name is. The correct answer is Kicho Asakura and not Tai. But this is her entire character for like 3 or 4 of the 7 chapters of this game. I call it Log Horizon syndrome, where a character's sole purpose is to repeat their one gimmick line every time they show up, like the stupid tank in Log Horizon who mentions how much he loves panties, or the ninja girl who also had a response that she did every time he said this. It's a routine that gets old the 3rd time, let alone the 50th time. Thankfully, she eventually drops this shit and has much more interesting character moments later when the game gives her the time of day. It's so weird that this is all her character is for hours of Devil Summoner 2. I get that she is very power crept and limited in what she can do when people are summoning demons and reality altering super beasts start showing up, but this is the same setback Narumi has, and they managed to write around it while giving him more character beyond nothing's better than a good fresh cup of joe. I really love how this game's story gives you a further look into the world of Devil Summoners. It does just the right amount of showing more without over-explaining everything and demystifying anything that was left vague and ambiguous. You get to see other Kuzunoha clan Devil Summoners and what they are like. Until now, if you only played the first Raidou game and not any of the other Devil Summoners, your only frame of reference is the Herald and the talking tree from the start of both games. Oh, and I guess the angry Raidou ancestors when you get a game over. In this, you get to see how weird Nagi and Girin are. Yeah, you're not going to become the title bearer of one of the Great Four Summoners and not have a few screws loose. It also gives someone for Raidou to relate to and bounce off of besides Narumi, who at the end of the day is still just a normal guy, a civilian that has some sort of deal with Yatagarasu, but can't hear Godo and I don't think can even see demons normally. Nagi's arc in the training hall of chapter 3 is great. This was who I was talking about earlier when asking how you view your demons. You get to see someone learning the way of becoming a Devil Summoner instead of just starting out as one. I do think that you could argue that the tool answer should be law or could be law, since we see Girin have a very pragmatic approach to being a Devil Summoner and how devils are supposed to be used. He's not outright disrespecting them, but it is a contractual agreement as soldiers and weapons. They play their role and he plays his. He is the logical extreme about following the rules and goes on and on about theory and conjecture. The wiki does not give Nagi an alignment like Chaos for Dawn or Law for Akane, but if I had to assign her, I'd say she initially is very chaos coded, but by the end of the game, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that she reaches neutral. Outside of his final moments in the end, I would say Girin is for sure law aligned, at least with how law is presented within the game itself through your choices. To further expand on your insight, you get to see the other clans and organizations that work under Yatagarasu. This is the easiest thing to fuck up in my opinion. You have your established vague shadow organization cult that has been working in the shadows for thousands of years to protect the balance of the world. Trying to show more of its inner workings could easily make it seem nonsensical and dumb. It happens all the time. Look at the Patriots in Metal Gear Solid, or the Daidoji in Yakuza Gaiden. But it ended up working out here because it leads you to to interacting with the 8th Fukoshi, a clan of assassins that resides in the Tsukigata village. They have such a unique way of killing their targets. By using these golden luck locusts, they sick them on their targets and have the locusts eat away all of their luck. Eventually, nothing but bad things will happen to the target, to the point they either die from an accident or are so beaten down from despair that they take their own life. A completely untraceable killing method with a built-in justification for people around the target, allowing the Fukoshi to operate in complete invisibility. The vibes of Tsukigata village are so good, as it perfectly captures that isolated village ecosystem with an insulated, outdated belief system to some obtuse god you've never heard of, a god that the townspeople live by, kinda like in The Wicker Man. The original Christopher Lee one, not the Nick Cage one where he gets stung by the bees.
Not the bees!
You can read the townspeople's thoughts and see how they don't trust you because they think an outsider will bring bad luck. Luck, their god Shinado, and the Tento lords are so ingrained into their psyche from generations of belief in living like this that this is how they operate naturally. They do not even question it for a second or even conceive the notion that there is another way of living other than this. It nails that creepy countryside feel that reminds me of things like The Wailing. It's such a nice switch up from the atmosphere of every location in this game, along with anywhere featured in Devil Summoner 1. While both Devil Summoner 1 and 2's stories are, at their core, focused around the curse of a family and their relationship to a god, 2's story feels much more of a personal tale. A major reason for this is that Don and Akane are present, taking active roles in the story way more than Kaya was in the first game. Don really carries this game's story on his back by breathing so much life into every scene he is in. Yeah, this is an only seen Boss Baby reminds me of Boss Baby thing, but Don reminds me so much of Ryuji Goda from Yakuza 2. Their mannerisms, their speech patterns, their brash nature that pushes them to violence to get what they want. He's such a compelling villain, and it's a treat anytime he is on screen. Don is so much more memorable compared to every villain of 1, not because any of them are particularly bad or because the story of 1 is bad, but because of the presence he has in these scenes, the amount of screen time he has, and having a really defined, compelling reason for his actions that are shown to the player decently early, instead of being truth nukes near the end of the game. He gives you a grand tour of explaining, hey, you want to know why I'm doing all this crazy shit? Well, find out for yourself. Follow me into this cave and see what's really going on. Become enlightened to the world around you that you don't even know exists. He wants to free his sister and by extension his village from the Tento lords, to put an end to the sacrificing of their daughters so the village lives off of the luck locusts the Tento lords give them in exchange. It's such a shocking reveal of what the Tento lords are like after what feels like hours of hyping them up. They're basically the immigrants from the story I mentioned earlier. They're little freaky bugoids that shit out the gold locusts. Despite being so weak and pathetic, the locusts and what they allow the Fukoshi to achieve has allowed the Tento lords to run carp launch in the Tsukigata village. They've established an ecosystem of such codependency that Don's father Akajiro Tsukigata feels like he is trapped in a vicious cycle, a situation with no escape. If they defy the Tento lords, the fate of the village surely will lead to ruin. They are struggling enough as it is, but he sees no other option. That's why Don goes rogue, heeds the tempting whispers of Lucifer, and sets out to become King Abaddon so that he will be strong enough to rip the system down. Their way of life is twisted and broken, and his cure is scorched earth. His intentions are noble, but to maintain his place as the Chaos Rep, it means he doesn't care what he has to do to achieve his goal. It doesn't matter how many people of the capital he harms. He doesn't care about the aftermath of stealing countless people's luck, how many people he has to kill, the trail of bodies that he leaves behind him. This is one of those core tenets of chaos that still remains within this game's story. The ends justify the means, and is still somewhat might makes right in that respect. It isn't until the reveal that he has been tricked by Lucifer and his plan to become King Abaddon was all a farce, and all of the murder and terrible things he had to do was for nothing, and will only bring more suffering to his people and everyone around him. Until then, all he sees is that power is the only way to bring change. Change can't be brought peacefully through negotiation. He needs to take it physically himself with power, and he needs the power of King Abaddon to do it. All that matters to Don is that he is saving his sister before she is sacrificed and breaking free of answering to uncaring gods that toy with man for their own gain. Devil Summoner 1 by comparison person is juggling a lot of different villains that are all trying to share screen time and are a bit of a daisy chain of current guy being used by the next guy above him. Don and the Tsukigata are such a central force that Devil Summoner 2's story vortex is around, where in one it goes from Kaya's uncle to Rasputin to Munakata to the Yatagarasu curse to the demon who has been secretly possessing Munakata this whole time to eventually the spirit who possesses Kaya. While all of these villains are interconnected, a lot of their narrative and connective tissue is reliant on things said, not shown. Time travel, hatred, grudges of people, and events that have long since passed. Both games are deeply rooted in the spiritually intangible, God, the afterlife, the very mechanism that binds our world, future, and selves together. But Devil Summoner 2 does a lot more showing to accompany the text. You see the effects the Tento lords have on the people of the village. You see what becomes of the women married to said Tento lords. Why so many of the young villagers have left to go to places like the capital, to find life outside of a town trapped in time, forgotten by the world. How this has been going on for a very long time and the lasting scars still affect everyone today. You are teleported to the infinite abyss multiple times throughout the game to talk to the different incarnations of Shinado. You experience how the imbalance of luck brings calamity, how the enraged Shinado tries to stop you and convinces you it is all pointless, that you should give up, that you should relinquish the title of Raidou. This may sound like I'm putting down the story of the first game to elevate the second ones, which isn't my intention. I do think that 2 does a better job of getting you emotionally invested in the characters, where Devil Summoner 1 really gets you invested in the events that are happening. But the one thing that both of these games excel at is giving the player firm feelings of affirmation of how important Raidou and his actions are to the people around him, how he is a positive force in their lives that gives them hope to break free of fate, to create their own paths, to look forward to tomorrow, to strive to improve, to strive to understand. Raidou Kuzunoha is the hero the people need, and he is here to answer the call. You could argue that this is storytelling 101 and isn't worth praising, but how Don, Akane, and their respective alignments draw parallel to how you can have Raidou operate as a person and by extension his worldview and actions is excellent. Akane being law and following the path laid out for her without questioning it because it's for the good of her people connects to how Law Raidou is a man living within the confines of the title he is given by the clan. When talking to her about life, their roles in it, fate, and their purpose, while answering with law options, she will continuously mention how the two of you are alike in that regard, following the path others have made for you. Don being Chaos and Chaos Raidou have much more of a literal parallel beyond the thematic parallels like with Akane, as it really feels like the two of you are the same character at times, given some of the options you can pick and the responses you spit out because of it. The more selfish, hedonistic Raidou is an individual who cannot be contained by the rule and tradition, the same way that Don cannot sit idly by and go along with the horrible deal the Tsukigata are stuck in with the Tento lords. This brings back what I said earlier about the neutral Raidou and how it feels like it is the best option. He sees the value in both Akane and Don's perspectives and approaches to life, but without the flaws and baggage of either. He is able to carve out the best outcome thanks to both of their opinions and perspectives without being dragged down by their trappings and singular worldview. While I like playing through Devil Summoner 2 as neutral the most, just picking whatever I think fits for any given situation, choosing Law when the time seems right, and picking Chaos for the others, but I think the best ending would have to be Law. All three endings are quality endings and bittersweet in their own right, and Chaos, while Akane ends up sacrificing herself, Don gets a second chance at redemption to right his wrongs and break the cycles that trapped his village by being the prophesized savior for the Tento, leading them to a better life as he is their shepherd, with the spirit of Akane watching over him. Now, a part of why I think Law is the better outcome is for a potential interpretation for the last scene. In the Chaos ending, when you see Akane fade into the still, she has this blue glow around her. It shows that she is a ghost or a spirit of some kind, at least that's how I'm reading it. In the Law ending, you see Don fade into frame, but he doesn't have that same glow. So it makes me believe that he somehow survives becoming the vessel for Shinado in the infinite abyss, that he is really there walking up to her as she's looking off into the sunset. Even if that isn't the case and he is meant to be dead, I feel it is the less bitter pill to swallow that Akane gets to live, finally free from the horrible fate that was in store for her as the sacrifice for the Tento lords. Law Raidou also feels much more of the canon of the three, so to speak, given what he's like in other media like the manga, how he carries himself in the first game, and just just the general demeanor he gives off. Can't comment on the book and how it characterizes Raidou because I haven't read it yet, but when I picture him in my mind's eye, I feel he is the much more aloof type that Law shapes him up to be in this game. You thought I was gonna end this here? Hell no! Dude, I gotta swerve out in front of my own outro segue like a BMW driver on the Garden State Parkway to bitch about the final dungeon of this game. Like the first game, Devil Summoner 2's final dungeon is annoying and one of the main factors in why I did not want to go back and record the other endings despite it being very easy to swap alignments because this dungeon is such a fucking chore. Of course, it does the asset reuse thing where you gotta fight a ton of the bosses you've been subjected to throughout the game. Most of them are piss easy, especially at this point when you have extremely powerful spells where you can just spam their weakness and watch their health bar melt. The fiends from Nocturne are in this game, and you gotta fight them possibly 3 times. Once when they ambush you in each chapter they individually show up in, a rematch via the side quests given to you by Lucifer, but they are on a timer, and then in the final dungeon's boss gauntlet to get to the final boss. So even if you manage to somehow avoid fighting the Pale Rider in the chapter he roams around in, you still gotta fight him here, and he is still the worst boss in this game because he teleports around all over, which your demons are too stupid to deal with. He teleports so fast that I was barely able to hit him with spells unless he popped up in the projectile's path, because spell charges and the time to get demons to actually get their ass into gear takes forever. Of course, he spawns 2 full HP clones of himself in this fight, which you also have to kill, and there isn't any easy way to track which one is which since the targeting menu doesn't show the HP bar of who you have highlighted. Don't get clipped by his melee attacks or else you will be turned to stone and can be insta-killed with a single hit. If that wasn't bad enough, you have to constantly be dodging his little specters, which also deal half of your HP if they connect. All the while fighting him in a combat arena too small with a camera oriented not well enough to deal with this in a dungeon where you have invisible floor tiles so you have to rub your face against the walkway edges until they appear. Fun! Then you gotta fight the final boss, which is another 3-phase fight, which doesn't replenish your mag between phases, so when you get to the final phase, I ended up having to spend almost a literal hour fighting him because you have no mana to hit him with his ever-cycling weaknesses, which he doesn't even convey to the player when he swaps the weaknesses and what weakness he swaps to. The player just has to guess by shooting a spell of their choice and hope it's the right one before he swaps to a different weakness and you don't even realize. And he keeps casting the bad luck roulette that makes it so you deal half damage, or when you finally have enough mag to cast a spell and you think you know his current weakness, he'll cast the bad luck roulette that makes spells cost double. And of course, I had already spent all of my few mag restoring items since I was trying to play a use it when you need it instead of stockpiling it and never touching them. I had to use my last one on the Pale Rider fight just before this because he kept teleporting around and my dumb fuck demons couldn't figure out to rotate 25 degrees to actually hit him. And sometimes I wasn't able to animation cancel their casts by calling them to my side by holding L2. My left index finger was hurting so bad in the final Shinado phase because I had to keep these morons glued to my hip, otherwise they would be hit by the one-shot beam he casts or the 3 Hammer of Dawns he strikes down on you when he isn't already landing on the kill every demon you have roulette option. The fact that this phase took me just shy of a fucking hour is insane. I love these 2 games, but their final dungeons and bosses are dog shit. Okay, since it turned out that I had a lot more to say about Raidou 2 than I initially thought, and this video ballooned into being an hour and a half long before this segment, the remake ended up coming out and I played through the whole thing. So here's a review of the remake instead of what it was originally going to be, which was talking about the differences from the remake based on the info and articles Atlus published or impressions of the remake. I call this a remake instead of a remaster because after playing it from start to finish, there is so many from the ground up changes to the original that calling it a remaster is absurd. A remaster in my mind is scaling up the textures and shit, porting the original to modern hardware with maybe a few tweaks here and there. I am overall positive on this remake. I think it has a very solid foundation for an eventual 3rd game, but there is also a lot of things that I think should be changed or are actively worse than the original that could be improved for both this release with patches and the hypothetical 3rd Raidou game. Alright, we have a lot to cover and I don't want this video to balloon to 2.5 hours. The three big changes featured in this remake are to the combat, the visuals, and the narrative. We'll save the narrative for the end in case people are watching this segment and are attempting to stay spoiler-free outside of mechanics. For the visuals, it should come at no surprise given what I said in the original game's segment, but I do not like the color changes and the lighting changes to this game, or the tweaks to character designs which go hand in hand with how they are lit. It just took away everything that I personally really liked about the visual aesthetic of the original. Characters seem almost sanded down, and with how they are lit, it gives them this plastic doll look to them. Raidou continues to look the best in my opinion in the first game, but I would say he looks better here than he did in 2, though he's oddly less expressive than he was in the original. The visual changes wouldn't be that big of a deal if this was a third game with its own identity and not recreating a game with a visual identity that already existed 20 years ago. It's a mess of color at times, which makes some combat encounters hard to parse. It just feels like it misses the point and vibes of the original. They went out of their way to mostly keep the fixed camera perspective, which I am extremely happy about, but with the lack of the pre-rendered backgrounds and some worse angles than the original, it sadly doesn't quite hit the same for me. It's weird because at times they make it look like a one-to-one recreation of the colors and visuals of the original, so I don't understand why they have such drastically different direction in other areas. It's even weirder when you watch the credits, and for some reason they included a high-res version of the credits from the original game, so you can see what it originally looked like at a higher resolution than the one it was originally released at. It just made me think, man, I wish this is how the remake looked. This already seems like a very contentious point based on tweets that have passed my timeline when the game just came out. It's disheartening to see how people love to disregard anyone who has anything negative to say about the game because this is the new hotness and Atlus can do no wrong. That's not even an Atlus thing, that's just how a lot of fan bases consume media now. I get that there are a massive amount of people who have no attachment to the original or its visuals, so they don't give a shit that it's different, but I also think that the point of a remake or a remaster is to maintain the original feel and experience, and in this regard, I don't think it does. For combat, it's a mix of 2's combat with a bunch of changes to even that game's formula, that it becomes its own thing. Right out the gate, I want to say that the most important thing is that it feels good and is fun. Like I talked about at length in the original game's segment at the start of the video 10 years ago. I liked that game's combat, but I think this will capture the general audiences far easier. It's fast, snappy, and really flashy. Your main combo on square and your heavy combo on triangle feel really smooth. I only really liked the sword's heavy combo as the axes was a little too slow for my liking, and the spear felt really strict and repetitive, like you could not interweave different moves while using it, so you just had to do this spin that locks you into place. They added a 2-hit air combo on square and a new homing heavy air attack on triangle, which I love. This is such a great gap closer. The jump itself feels a bit floaty, which can get annoying in some of the shmup dodging attack sequences we'll talk about in a bit, but when using it for combos, it isn't that bad since you aren't in the air that long without helm splitting right back to the ground. Maybe it's asking too much, but yeah, I do wish there was an enemy step mechanic, but this is Atlus, not Capcom. I really like the follow-up gap closer when you come out of a dodge. It feels really smooth. However, I do not like how this gap closer happens anytime you have even the slightest amount of distance from who you are locked onto. The move assist in this game can be too overbearing for my taste. It makes fighting anyone you aren't locked onto impossible, as it feels like you are fighting against the controls more than the demons at times. The amount of instances I accidentally rocketed myself into danger and died because I was locked onto the wrong target and the game does not let you override it directionally with the analog stick is too much to count. Lock-ons are good and have their place in video games, but the way it's implemented in this game, in conjunction with the extreme move assist, leaves a bit to be desired. Ideally, if you are holding the analog stick in the direction towards another enemy, the game would be smart enough to let you override the move assist and fight who you want to instead of sending you flying in ways you weren't intending. I guess the ultimate solution is to never use the lock-on, unless you really want the gap closer, which at that point I feel like you should have just made it a stinger-like input from DMC. Two new moves you have access to are the Devil's Bane and Spirit Slash. The former is an attack you can do after either knocking enemies down or doing a perfect dodge. They're flashy, but I don't really care for them that much. They just get somewhat repetitive after a while and feel kind of intrusive explosive to the flow of combat, and are abusable since you can trigger them off perfect dodges back to back. Spirit Slash is basically the final evolution of the team-up attacks. Now it is its own separate meter you can cast when full, which will play an elaborate animation for a stage-wide nuke, which will deal whatever element is the most prevalent weakness. I still think how the team attacks worked in the original were by far the best version of the three, but I don't think we're ever getting those back. The Spirit Slashes are incredibly strong in this game and are a key way to speedrunning through bosses, but are balanced by the fact that they do take a decent amount of time to charge. The game's resource system is an evolved form of how mag worked in Raidou 2. You have the mag meter, which is used for the spells of your demon, but instead of being as strict as it was in 2, you now have the ability to constantly regenerate it with your light attacks. The trade-offs for light and heavy attacks are that light attacks deal little to no damage, but refund a ton of mag, doubly so if you hit a stunned enemy. Heavy attacks no longer cost mag, like they do in 2,
but they do not recover mag when hitting a stunned enemy in exchange for dealing massive amounts of damage.
Kinda like how basic attacks on stunned enemies worked in the original. Your demon's physical attacks also regen mag, so with these two things combined, it makes it so the rate of which you regen mag feels insane. You are almost never in a situation where you have no resources and can't use your demons to do things. One of the things I dislike about this setup is how little damage your light attacks do. Here is me fighting level 2 enemies at level 31. Look how many swings it takes me to kill these enemies. When I am in combat encounters, I can physically see the numbers fly out of enemies when I hit them with my heavy attacks, dealing roughly 100 to 120 damage, only to then see anywhere from 8 to 20 fly out when I do a light attack. I don't think light attacks should deal a tenth of the damage of what a heavy attack does, even if they are designed to have drawbacks in mind. I think dealing at least half the damage of heavy attacks could be a happy middle ground, or ideally you make it so there are more combos that you can mix up and weave the two together. Enemies are already way tankier than they were in the original, which drags out some fights really bad. It's not even just bosses, but basic enemies feel like they require more to take down while constantly making stronger swords compared to the original, so I do think the numbers should be adjusted at least a little. I can't imagine what these combat encounters are like when you are under-leveled and under-equipped. Your gun has been reworked for the third time, and it still has me standing firm that the best iteration was the first one. It was the perfect blend of active real-time combat and JRPG menuing. This is the worst incarnation in my opinion, and is one of my biggest complaints with the remake. They turned it into a Kingdom Hearts 3 shot lock, where you aim and highlight a target so they can be hit up to 5 to 6 times. First of all, it sounds like a pea shooter. It is one of the most flaccid gun sounds I have ever heard. Second, it's terrible and does so little damage that you only ever use it to stun enemies that are teleporting around like you had to do in Raidou 2. Elemental bullets are gone again, and instead of having the limited time buffs of 2, they opted into giving Raidou summoner skills that are on a cooldown which fill their niches. Initially I thought it was pretty neat, but the more I think about it and the more I played into the game and got later skills, I liked the system less and less. Some of these are extremely broken, and the game does not feel balanced around them, like making yourself immune to everything but physical attacks every 30 seconds. Hell, the basic elemental ones are broken enough as they give you a method to deal an AoE spell that can hit multiple enemies for huge damage right away.
They're also better than your demon's AoE spells because those are not a projectile. They are an AoE around your demon, where this is shooting out a projectile that explodes in an area where you are aiming to.
You can even swap them around in the middle of combat, and while it balances it by making the skill you swapped to be on cooldown, it's still incredibly broken. The whole point of devil summoning is that Raidou and his demons have a symbiotic relationship that covers your weaknesses. In the originals, Raidou intentionally could not do everything. That is why you had these demons you can swap between on the fly. Now the demons feel like an afterthought because this and a few other system changes we'll get into in a sec. There are a decent amount of differences when it comes to demons in this game too. No longer do you have to hit enemies with their weaknesses to capture them. You simply need to have enough mag, which is rarely an actual requirement outside of when your demons instantly waste it all because they keep spamming buffs and heal spells. You just walk up to them, hold right trigger, and then mash circle. You even gain items and money when doing this, but the menu pop-ups move by so fast sometimes that you don't even really get the chance to read what you are getting. When capturing them,
there is a chance that they will have a negotiation-like question for you. If you answer them right, they can join your party with a stat increase, fully heal you, fully heal your mag, and in some cases I'm pretty sure come with more loyalty. You control 2 demons like in Raidou 2, but sadly it's time for one of my other major complaints with the remake, and that is how the AI of your demons and your control over them. The game simply does not give you the control over them in a way that is comparable to either how it worked in Devil Summoner 1 or Devil Summoner 2. They are straight up dumber and you have less options to engage with them compared to 2 games from nearly 20 years ago. The amount of input you have over them amounts to cast spell, yes, no, on left or right on the D-pad, and telling them what spell you want them to cast and who to cast it at. They don't have the personality parameters from the first game, it doesn't have the repeat spell option from the second game. You tell your demons which spell you want to use and who to target, and they eventually will do what you tell them to, only to then go right back to doing whatever they want. Sometimes I would find them actively ignoring what I commanded them to do just so they can cast a buff or a heal spell off cooldown because the AI saw that one of us was missing 5 HP and any of the buffs, be it decrease incoming damage, increase outgoing damage, elemental immunities, and etc., just ran out. They love to waste all of your mag as soon as a fight starts and anytime you have any amount of HP missing. It's a good thing that you regen mag so fast with light attacks, because if it worked like Raidou 2, then you would be constantly stuck with no way to have your demons being able to cast anything. If you don't want them to be blowing all of your mag like Dana White at a Texas Hold'em table in Vegas, then you better hit both directions on the D-pad and tell them, no, 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 I don't want you using any spells. It's so frustrating to see them be actively worse compared to the original games, telling them what to do only to see them struggle to listen to your commands, and when they eventually finally do execute them, they don't even stay on the target and constantly go to fight the endlessly spawning shit mobs. The amount of times they would just not fight the boss and instead would waste all of their time and my mag on lower level endlessly spawning mooks that flood the field was too much to count. It's insane that this was an issue that they figured out how to work around in the very first game nearly 20 years ago, but somehow couldn't get it right in the remake. Menuing in combat doesn't even feel as smooth because they had to move the menu opening to start instead of being on R1 like in the originals. Because the changes to the other combat systems like the gun, which now requires 2 buttons, or the summoner skills, which takes up R2, which was what the quick demon command menu was on in Raidou 2. There are simply too many things and not enough buttons on the controller to be able to remap this without something else suffering, which leads me to the biggest example of button mapping issues, how you control and dictate who your demons are fighting. So a thing you can do in the original duology was that you can tap a button to call the demon to your side. In 2, this was a mandatory thing to do since your demons could now flash step to enemies and there were big hazard AoEs bosses would constantly cast, so you would need to call them to your side and go invisible for safety. I don't think it should be referred to as a gameplay tech, but a thing you could do is tap L2 to just call the demons to your side without making them invisible and untargetable. This would function kind of like a reset, which would make them target who you are on top of. Not only is this feature been moved to pressing in the left stick, which I detest as an input, it just does not feel smooth when you are trying to move Raidou out of the way of hazards while also needing to push in the left stick at the same time to call your demons to safety. Bosses now have these rage art unblockable modes where they will do these attacks that you either have to dodge or jump over, which requires you to call the demons to your side to keep them safe or be one-shot by them. Most of the major fights of this game have unique attacks, but after a while some of the lesser bosses just keep reusing the same few attack patterns over and over again. In the remake, when you call the demons to your side, you can only make them go into that inactive, invisible, untargetable safety mode, so you lose the finer way to control them compared to the originals. You already can't dodge when blocking like you could in 2, so this further adds to the lackluster feeling of these changes. Since your demons have the flash step move that teleports them to whoever they are targeting like 2, you'll also find them rarely on your screen unless you are trying to keep them in the camera view, which really isn't necessary and is super cumbersome. So this just adds further disconnect between you and your demons. For some reason, instead of having their health bars be a part of the core HUD elements like they were in Devil Summoner 2, you were only able to see their HP on these tiny little meters above their head head, which can easily be lost in the confusion with giant demon mosh pits, ton of particle effects, and the aggressive colors of this game. So to let you know when your demons are in danger, your screen has to aggressively flash red, which just adds more bullshit and noise to the screen and fucks with the visual aesthetic more than it needed to. The combat encounters of the remake already have way more visual and auditory noise in them compared to the original, with the addition to voice acting, as you are constantly barraged by combat barks and the text of them on the left side of the screen. Goto calls out to you way too much in combat for my liking. And there's a real simple solution for this. All they had to do was just make 2 little health bars above yours in the bottom middle of the screen. Maybe make them a different color so they stand out from your health bar, but that's really it. And like I just mentioned about the command menu, there is simply nowhere to move this action without making something else be moved to pressing in L3. Controllers really just need to make those back paddles or buttons a standard, because we have hit a limit of how much stuff you can have a character do with the amount of buttons given. It is also worth mentioning that despite having a massive controller input menu that itemizes every single different input for each gameplay style and menu you can interact with, you can only remap a few combat inputs. Only the prompts that are highlighted in this menu are the ones that you can change. Anything with the slightly dithered, grayed out text can't be. What is even the point of this? I want to move the command menu back to R1 when I was traversing the overworld. You have an option for this, and I want to make the game play like the original too, but this is one of the many settings that are just there for show. At least at the time of recording, you aren't able to remap these buttons. Some other combat mechanics brought up from Raidou 2 include the sword alchemy system. It is now organized into 3 trees which branch off a few times each. Because each new sword requires the previous one, this does mean that you have to restart the upgrade tree multiple times if you want to get everything. This was really tedious and I didn't do that. But this does mean that you do have the sword, spear, and axe subtypes again, and each give you either an active summoner spell to cast or a sword passive. These passives were individually tied to each sword, and you needed to have them equipped to reap the benefits in the second game. Now they are unbalanced in the sense that you can equip quite a few of them right away and unlock even more slots from doing the side cases, which were also brought up from Raidou 2. The materials to craft swords can actually be bought from the store now over the course of the game, instead of needing to find them out in the overworld or receiving them from leveling up demons or fusing them away. There is also a tab in the pause menu which will allow you to talk to these demons, and they will give you them as gifts as well. This is a passive thing that builds up from just playing the game. Eventually you'll just see a number next to this tab in your pause menu, which signifies that they have something you can receive. Buying these items in the shop is balanced out by the fact that they are pretty pricey, so I was nowhere near as rich as I was in the original Devil Summoner 1. Another thing you can buy from the shop or find out in the world are these books of spells and demon passives. They are consumables akin to TMs from Pokemon. Some spells require multiple books to be able to teach said spell to a demon and allow them to pass it on later when they are fused. You are always able to teach the current demon with one book, but some of these spells won't be transferable with just that. It's a neat idea that prevents the player from running into instances where your demons don't have coverage, but with the summoner skills, that really isn't an issue in practice and would have been a system you would have had to engage with if this was not here. It's kind of unfortunate with how half-baked it is, because now demons can use all of the abilities they have learned instead of it being like 2 where you have to select them in the status menu. The way combat encounters function has been changed. In the original duology, you would get sucked into a random battle after a few steps. This was denoted by the little diamonds in the bottom right corner. In the remake, it functions similar to games like SMT 5. When in the Dark Realm or in dungeons like Beneath the Mansion, enemies will spawn into the world and walk around. When you have a demon summoned, you can press square and launch them at the demons to initiate a combat encounter. The PNG that swooshes past the screen when combat encounter starts look super goofy and honestly terrible. I wish they just kept the swish pan of the originals. It looked like something that was made for the trailers that ended up as a feature in the final game. In fact, that's exactly what I thought it was. I thought it was just something for the trailers and not a gameplay facet. A new feature added to make it so you can't stunlock enemies to death like you were able to in Devil Summoner 2 is that bosses and larger encounters have these weakness protection shields you have to break through first before you can stun them with their weakness. I don't really like this because they drag out fights more than some of the bloated HP bars already do. I I get they are trying to make the game harder in a sense, but I find that this is just tedious. It can't help but feel like a feature that was slapped into the game because everything seemingly needs to have a Sekiro-styled stamina and poise meter now. It doesn't really add anything to the game. The game is already piss easy in every other aspect, where it's dumbed down to the story, actively takes away the need for problem solving for objectives, and a bunch of bosses are straight up easier because of your new moves and movement. The original was a very basic, straightforward, and pretty easy game itself, but then you have events like Chapter 7 in this game, where it takes the curse you are given that causes damage over time and basically makes it a non-factor. It is such an irrelevant aspect of the story in the remake that I completely forgot that it was even a thing that is supposed to happen. In the original, you were taking chunks of damage pretty often, where in the remake you can probably go 5 minutes or more without it ever happening. Since you are in control of when combat encounters initiate now, that means you are free to run right past them whenever you want. I do always worry that when this implementation of combat encounters is in an RPG and they don't tell you what level range you should be for an area, I fear if I'm going to be under-leveled or not by the time I go to the next zone. It wasn't really an issue in this game since I was conscientious to fight as much as I could without wasting my time. Combat encounters are also placed out like they were in Raidou 2, so the main towns like Gienzacho and Harumicho allow you to explore them freely without the threat of demons. A cool way they get around the potential issue of party composition and XP curves is the introduction of the Aerial Rifts. These are infinitely respawning red bubbles which you can interact with to fight enemies in areas you otherwise would have no encounters in. Initially, I was feeling whatever on the system, seeing it as just another thing to waste your time so you can fill a checklist for goodies. Then I realized that they actually are a smart way to allow you to have a controlled environment for combat encounters in towns that you can initiate whenever you want, if at all, without the hassle of needing to go into the Dark Realm or going back to the Goma Den to summon stuff from the compendium. One thing that this change to how combat encounters works is influenced for the worse is solo investigation combat encounters. I bemoaned in the second game segment that because how they designed the dungeons and exploration abilities in that game, I never even had a single combat encounter as a demon. In the remake, they made it so demon combat encounters are a super niche, scripted thing that only happens a few times. When doing solo investigations, you can't launch yourself at enemies like you can when you are playing as Raidou. They just completely ignore you and you phase right through them. Because of this fact, all the training halls have been reworked so they no longer have the demon barriers. You have to send them in alone to explore. You just walk around and have Raidou chuck your demons at the red crystals like a football to collect your goodies. I was so mad when I found this out because once again, they are further pushing one of the fun aspects and facets of the game that I really liked about the original to the point it's barely a footnote in this remake. Because of how tanky enemies are in the remake, the few times you do get to do fights as the demons, it doesn't even feel good. You were able to do this Shinobi PS2-like dash endlessly around them, but the combat itself is limp, unsatisfying in the feedback department, and just is drawn out too long because of the health bars. Miscellaneous quality of life changes that I really like are the extended fusion options like the search feature. I really love the visualized list of all the possible fusion results and their recipes. I don't remember which SMT game introduced it. I think it was maybe 4, but whichever it was, I'm a huge fan of it. The ability to have unique registers of demons in the compendium so they don't get overwritten later with a different version of said demon is super nice. It allows you to keep a unique version of one of your beloved little freaks even if they might level up or get a higher leveled version of them later in another dungeon. It's a feature that only opens the door to more fusion creativity. You now have the ability to go back and forth between the Goma Den and the shop via the menu. No longer do you have to do the extra steps of tedium of needing to exit out of the Goma Den, loading back onto the street, going into the store, loading in, hearing the shopkeeper dialogue, then select the Goma Den, load in, hear the lines from Victor before you can finally get back to what you were doing. You can even do this when you teleport to the Goma Den in dungeons from save points, so you are never locked out of going to the shop in the remake, which may break some game balance, but this is something that I'm completely fine with doing. Despite raising issues with the control layout and the inability to change a bunch of it earlier, I am a huge fan of having demons summons be a shortcut on the D-pad's down arrow. I like how long enemies are stunned by hitting their weakness is visualized with a meter now. When running into demon abilities that can be used in overworld exploration, you no longer have to play music musical chairs with who you have summoned to figure out what is needed. Instead, they just tell you and you get to hit circle, and they will just spawn whichever demon can do said skill. The quick save option makes it super convenient to end sessions whenever, wherever you want, instead of having to push on or backtrack to a save station. I wish all games just had a suspended save state that allowed you to exit out of the main menu when you wanted to close the game. I would especially really love it in older games on consoles that do not have sleep modes like the PS4 or the PS5. One of the oddly out of place quality of life backsteps that the remake features is that for some reason you actually have to talk to your demons that have the item finding skills when walking around in the overworld. In the originals, they would just automatically stop you and give you the item, but for some reason you have to turn around and try to get the game to allow you to talk to them, which feels finicky and just annoying. The next two quality of life changes I think are features that the vast majority of players will see as nothing but a net positive, but I have a different stance and think that they open the door to an interesting conversation. Quality of life, gameplay friction, and player expression have become a hot button topic of discussion lately. I think it's a very nuanced thing to talk about, which is difficult since people hate nuance on the internet, especially when you have to process someone's nuanced analysis of something instead of boiling it down, missing the point, and mocking them for your takeaway that isn't even correct. In the context of the Raidou remake, it is how it has designed and streamlined XP and exploration. Now you share XP with all of your demons in every combat encounter, even if they never left their tube and took zero part in the fight. I think this aspect of the change is fine. Demons often got power crept really fast in the original, since you are meant to be fusing them away pretty quickly. This allows demons to maintain relevance longer with the conjunction of the spell books and the newly added grimoires, which function just like rare candies for experience, even if it's better to just give them to yourself, so you can keep some of your favorite demons as long as you want and minimize grinding. Where I think this change goes too far is the fact that every demon also passively gains loyalty no matter what. Loyalty is such a core part of the original two games' experiences. In Devil Summoner 1, you could not even fuse demons if they did not have max loyalty. This meant that you had to constantly be giving everyone their time to shine, or use the rare and expensive sakes to expedite the process. The necessity to level up your loyalty to gain rep to expand your tube count and be able to fuse meant that you were forced to experiment with demons you otherwise would have never touched. You were constantly pushed to expand your lineup and keep on fusing demons into stronger ones, and if they could not do that and did not make anything useful, you can do the sacrifice fusion to empower much better demons that had better stat lines and better end goals. You could donate them to the soda shop, or you can use them for sword fusions. Now, after like 3 fights, your entire party will have max loyalty and you are blitzing through rep ranks. The rep part I don't care about. The fact that you have more tubes at the end of chapter 1 than you could even have in the entirety of the original game doesn't matter to me. You don't even need that many to begin with, outside of the purpose of gaining loyalty and experience. I don't think I even had 24 demons to fill all of my party by the time I reached the final dungeon. I don't even know the max amount of tubes you can get if you set out to grind your reputation and do any of the side cases that might reward you with more tubes like in Devil Summoner 2. But because of how lax it is with the loyalty XP share, you never have to use any other demons. You just make 2 decently strong ones that have basic coverage of all of the element types, and you fill in the blanks for what the other 2 do not have. And then you never have to use anything else in your party again. Party building is a complete joke, and because of the summoner skills and the spell books, demons having coverage blind spots isn't even really a thing. I also want to shut down the idea that because you can control what demon skills are inherited now, it also causes this, but that's a crock of shit. Anyone who cries about this addition to this or the later SMT games or in the Nocturne remaster don't know what they're talking about. Games like the original and SMT3 did allow you to choose what skills you could inherit. You just had to keep backing in and out of the menu over and over again, rolling the dice and spinning the roulette until you eventually got the loadout you wanted. It could just take you up to 30 minutes of sunk cost dedication. It was never an actual issue you had to interface with outside of how annoying it was and how time consuming it was. So the convenience to give the player the control doesn't change anything outside of the amount of time you waste. This one small change to loyalty XP completely undermines the entire ethos of the original duology's gameplay gameplay design. The happy middle ground would be that level XP is shared, but loyalty isn't. That way you are still forced to use every demon you recruit, but they don't fall super behind in levels, reducing the grind for unlocking spells to inherit and keeping your playthrough paced smoothly. In the context of exploration, it's much more of a complex thing that I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with my sentiment, but I hope they will at the very least hear me out to the end regardless. So in the remake, they made tapping the left bumper open the express rail car menu, which can teleport you directly to any town, major building, or dungeon you have previously been to. No longer do you have to go to the world map, no longer do you have to go back to the nameless shrine to go into the dark realms, no longer do you have to go to the exit points of towns. This cuts down so much on exploration because you can constantly go from places like the bathhouse to the mansion to the detective agency to the Goma Den without having to take a single step. While I appreciate the luxury, since this is now my third playthrough of the Soulless Army in the span of a few years, 2 playthroughs in the span of 2 months, and I don't usually like to replay games unless they really hook me, even if I adore them, it allowed me to just get through the game faster for the sake of this video. But I think it's almost too convenient. It's too streamlined as an actual experience for people who aren't like me and in my situation, who are playing it for the first time and aren't playing games for making videos, playing a game just for the sake of playing it, which granted I am still doing, but the average person isn't taking the time to think, how is this well designed? Is this well designed? Analyzing how all of these different systems coming together form and create an experience, where in this instance it feels like it is streamlining the gameplay experience to the point that you can just mindlessly shamble through the game with little engagement. These areas become so less memorable and explored and lived in because of this. Combine this with the newly added objective markers, and not only do you rarely have to interface with traversal, but the experience is streamlined to the point that all that's left is the line. You mindlessly go from point A to point B because that's what the game tells you to do. No longer do you have to do the simple yet satisfying put 2 and 2 together, thinking to yourself, this is the thing I need to currently do. Who have I already talked to, or where have I already been that could be related to said objective? Don't take this as I want this game to be an esoteric nightmare you need a guide on your second monitor for. I just think that there should be some level of back and forth, something comparable to the original. With the changes to how encounters and cities work, I think that would have been just fine as is. The experience has already been expedited and streamlined in many other good ways. My playtime, despite doing a decent amount, but not all of the side content, was still less than half of my playtime of the original. But now you barely have to engage with any location after you go to it once. While pondering on this subject and how I could articulate it in a way that people would understand where I'm coming from, it got me thinking about Expedition 33. Expedition 33 is a game with no minimap. The director of the game chose to do this so you, the player, would not constantly be staring at it instead of the lavish environments they crafted. This works to enhance the experience in 3 key ways. 1, it forces the player to explore. You can't rely on the map and just look at the line of where to go, unlike games like Red Dead 2, which other YouTubers like Nakey Jakey talk about how instead of looking at the beautiful world Rockstar built, he was just looking at the red line in the tiny circle in the bottom corner of his screen. 2, it obfuscates the fact that the environments are basically hallways. The player is less likely to notice how uncomplex the exploration and level design of each area is when you can't see the boxed map that shows that you are walking in straight lines that only deviate slightly. For example, I think the exploration of Doom the Dark Ages was massively hurt by the fact of how detailed its map was, while also showing where all the collectibles were, without requiring you to explore these zones first. It was not nearly as interesting to explore when I can just press tab and see where everything is instantly every few seconds. 3, which I think is a major one in my opinion, is that it creates the marriage of narrative and gameplay experiences of being an expeditioner. You are an explorer in uncharted land, or land that no one has ever come back from. There is no map because no one has ever made it this far and come back to tell the tale. People meme the "it really makes you feel like Batman" to death, but it became a phrase for a reason. Games are about creating illusions to sell experiences. Before the Arkham games, there wasn't a Batman game with the level of budget, presentation, and game feel. I'd bet my life if we ever did get a good Superman game that sold being Superman as an experience, people would be in droves saying it really makes you feel like Superman, because the biggest point of reference before its release was fucking Superman 64. Licensed games were often the butt end of jokes, cash grabs to prey on uninformed parents and kids who did not understand the concept that a game could be bad. Here, the experience of the game is trying to sell you the feeling of an expeditioner, seeing those who come before you and failed and learning from their mistakes so you don't become the latest failed attempt. For the Raidou games, it's about selling the experience of someone who has control over demons, an important balance keeper in the world of the dark arts, and is also a detective that takes cases around the town beyond the supernatural ones only he can handle. The exploration and how it feeds into the detective work to progress the story is an integral part of the experience, but how the remake handles exploration of towns, interacting with NPCs, and the way story progresses, both in the literal sense of how events play out and how the text is written and conveyed to the player, the original experience is being watered down here. The original is not a confusing game. I cannot stress just how straightforward Devil Summoner 1 is. Outside of maybe 1 or 2 places like Chapter 10, if you simply talk to NPCs, you will always know where you are going and what you need to do. The game had the perfect level of bluntness. It told you where to go and what to do, but respected your intelligence enough that it wasn't worded and presented to the player as if the game thought they were a blithering moron with zero critical thinking skills. You would see things like, damn, I gotta find this guy. I have no idea where he could be hiding in town. Let me go talk to the Yakuza dude at the bathhouse. Or you would run into a situation where, damn, I need to learn about some ancient artifacts and kind of new and weird technology. Let me go to the Goma Den or the shop and talk to the shopkeeper. It was basic, but it rewarded you for problem solving and lateral thinking. There were even fail-safes if you did get lost, or if there was enough time between play sessions that you forgot what you were doing. You could always go back and talk to Narumi at the HQ and he would point you in the right direction. If that didn't work, you could also go to the soda joint. Town NPCs were always talking about something related to the current events of the chapter. JRPGs have been doing the whole talk to faceless townspeople NPCs to figure out where to go since like Final Fantasy fucking 1 in the 80s. This game already added and changed a ton of dialogue to be as blunt as humanly possible, just short of reaching out of the screen to play the game for you, which is its own can of worms we'll get into. Stuff like the objective markers feel so redundant and pointless. They water down the experience and are a case of too much quality of life that there is no life to be had. Sure, it won't matter to people who have no context for the original or don't care because they just want their new flashy toy to do the thing so they can be a part of the conversation. But if we are to get a third Raidou game, I would not want it to be like this. I don't want the developers to get positive reinforcement that this is the direction they should take, where they water down the experience to the point that it loses all of the gameplay flavors that made Raidou unique in the first place. I don't want to lose that adventure game aspect, the problem-solving detective work. It doesn't need to be obtuse that it would make classic From Software or Double Fine blush. I just want it to be like it was in the original. The requirement to put 2 + 2 together, going around and talking to people to get information, getting to know the townspeople and being a part of their lives, make the world feel lived in and believable. Let me give a relatively spoiler-free example before I get right into talking about the narrative changes and script. In Chapter 2, you are exploring Ginzacho for clues to the whereabouts of your current target. You go around town and ask NPCs what they've seen, since there are sightings and even attacks that have happened here. Below the overpass, there is a homeless man you can talk to. If you have a pagan demon, you can read his mind and find out that he is holding out evidence on you. You can call him on this and then get it off him. Eventually, this ties back into the main plot of said chapter once you talk to a few NPCs, and after a boss fight, when you get another key item dropped by said boss and then go talk to another NPC. In the original, you already explore, find the evidence, and tie it into the story and investigation long before the boss fight. Now in the remake, this sequence plays after beating the boss.
Hey, you there? Yeah, I'm talking to you, Sonny.
It seems he means us.
Old lady tossed me out the door. There's a lot of things you can find at the scene of an Hey, you interested?
Yeah, he just calls you over and gives it to you. This is what I mean about losing the detective experience and gameplay flavor. You are no longer hitting the town to find evidence and being pointed in the right direction via your actions and context clues. You are railroaded by the story as it takes control away from you and treats you like a drooling moron, which is where I will be dropping the last spoiler warning because the real egregious examples all require me to talk about what happens in this game. There is a lot of dialogue changes in this game. Some of them are for the sake of censorship, like to not draw allusions to the Japanese military and the horrible things they did during or shortly after this time period, and to not make it seem like the game is painting them in a positive light. Like the leader of the Navy in Chapter 7 who gets cursed is reworked into being some important god figure for Yatagarasu named Lord Takagi. Do I think this was necessary? No. Do I think this is a dumb change? Yeah. Do I want these changes in the game? No, it would be better without them, but it's not like I or anyone else complaining about them is going to or can change anything about it. But the allusions to the land of the rising sun and the Japanese Imperial Army aren't the issues here. The way a lot of key events and dialogue have been rewritten in this game is absurd. It is to the point that it's so over-explained at every chance it gets that it feels like as if the developers had no faith in anyone who played this game. It seriously has me worried about how they are going to butcher the second game's narrative if they approach it like this. 2 already has some pretty unnecessary constant need to summarize what has happened up until that point, so I can't imagine the approach that a remake for it will take. The low-hanging fruit would be to make fun of Persona fans or Atlus fans, insulting their reading comprehension and critical thinking skills, but I'm not going to do that. I refuse to believe someone actually would need the story to be written out and explained to them like this. It's a level of parody that you imagine when reading those articles talking about how Netflix shows are written with people not watching them and having them on their second monitor or while doing laundry in mind. It is the logical extreme of what people deride Marvel writing for. Chapter 4 is about stopping these shipping disappearances both for the cargo and the sailors. The lead you eventually get is that Elfman, the foreigner who worked with the shipping companies, started acting different recently and is likely the person who has the power and ability to sneak Rasputin into Japan and would know where he is. After you save the cargo and the sailors, the owner of Ryugu will give you this ring to help convince Elfman to talk to you. She ends this conversation by telling you he lives over in the Catholic Church, the same one you've seen off in the distance the whole chapter while exploring the residential area of Harumicho. After getting sea transportation, you are able to go to the other side of the bay, explore the 2 points of access, the church and the graveyard at the end of the street. In the graveyard, you see a spirit like the ones in the training hall from the tutorial at the start of the game. When you talk to it, the revelation that Elfman has been killed and someone else is impersonating him is revealed. In the remake, as soon as you get to Harumicho for the first time, this plays.
Hello? What is it?
Over the course of the chapter, as you complete more and more objectives, the voice will try and communicate with you until this happens.
You can hear me, can't you? From the pier near the naval headquarters. Cross the water and... I heard the voice too, Raidou. Those words? Let's head to that cemetery.
The original already gave you reasons and justifications on where you needed to go, so I don't understand why this disembodied voice has to talk to you the entire chapter. Also, it can say some really obvious shit and Goto can turn to you and go, "Hey, I think that guy was talking to you. We should go over there and listen to what he has to say." Every chance the game gets from here on out, it will go out of its way to over-explain things, demystify every piece of vague dialogue from the original, and actively undercuts multiple reveals that happen later in this game. Now, I can't comment on the Japanese text of the original game, but I have a hard time believing that this was what the script was like. If it was, then the English localization was an actual improvement by leaving things vague in places it should have. You didn't need to constantly be explained the same concepts, things, and people over and over again 20 times over the course of a 10-hour game. From here till the end of the video, we're going to quickly run through all of the major changes and spending varying amounts of time on them. In the original, the confession session booth scene has Rasputin say he will carry out his assigned duty. He will find the anomaly and make sure history returns to its natural course at all cost. He protests that does his employer really think he will do everything just because he is told to, and to not treat him like a doll, he has plans of his own. In the remake, the smaller change is that they draw emphasis to Taisho 20 and how it's a timeline that has been changed. During his boss fight, he mentions how you are the Raidou of this era, further implying that he is a time traveler, or at the very least knows other Raidous from different eras. It needlessly brings the time travel and the multiple timeline plot points into the game way earlier than the original, which will undercut later explanations from him and other characters. As we already mentioned, there is a change to who is cursed at the start of chapter 7. The visual for the curse is even different in the remake. It looks really cool, but I do wish we had the goofy Smurf cursed Raidou like from the original. The bigger change is that at the end of the chapter, when talking to Sadakichi, when going through the 3 dialogue trees in the remake, he goes out of his way to say Munakata started acting differently and for some reason started covering his mouth whenever he speaks. It's such an unnecessary line to draw attention to him and alludes to the fact that he is possessed and the demon is living in his mouth far earlier than the reveal from when it happens. It's such a weird thing to call attention to, especially written like this. It's so out of place, and it initially made me think, did Munakata even cover his mouth in the original, or was this something they did to make it even more obvious in the remake? After going back and checking, no, he does do this in the original, but in the remake they couldn't help but spell it out instead of letting it be a reveal later when you confront him in the subterranean military base. It's something that you could easily have missed and not noticed in the original, since there are multiple instances where he talks but isn't covering his mouth. The thing you won't realize unless you rewatch these cutscenes is that these are always having his mouth obfuscated. Either he's turned around when speaking, something is blocking his view, or just how the scene is framed. When you confront Munakata in the tower in chapter 8, for some reason he now outright explains what the soulless god is, what the weapon is capable of, how it operates, and how it is powered long before the reveal you are supposed to see later. He explains the events of the ancient past that led to the grudge and resentment today differently between both games. For some reason he now outright says that the demon possessing Kaya is actually from the future who brought technology far beyond anything achievable in Taisho 20. Again, these are all reveals meant for later chapters and events in the game, so I don't get why the remake is so insistent on blowing its load early, telling the player what to expect, so by the time you get to the original reveal they have no impact since you've already been told what they are multiple times hours earlier. The reveal that the main villain has a gigantic skyscraper-sized mech in 1920 does not have nearly as much impact when you are told that he has a gigantic skyscraper-sized mech 5 hours before you see it. The way chapter 9 starts is changed to completely undercut the reveal that you are in a different timeline. In the original, a black cat walks up to you while getting off the bridge. Goto remarks that they are a handsome cat, a joke whose punchline you'll get later when it's revealed that actually that's another timeline version of himself. Because of how the camera is framed in the original cutscene, you don't actually see which way the other Goto runs off when you are told to tail him. This leads to the player exploring the 2 main streets of Tsukadacho, which allows them to see the timeline differences, like Kaya is still here and is hanging out with Rin. Narumi is late on bills, so the landlady has the building locked up so you can't go see him. Eventually you'll get to the shrine and you'll finally come face to face with the other Raidou. In the remake, you see the cat awkwardly run all the way from the bridge to the shrine in an elongated sequence that feels like something out of a Smiling Friends gag. Seeing this plus the objective markers gives the player zero reason to explore and slowly see how things are different and that you aren't in Kansas anymore. At the end of the chapter, the other Raidou outright says that there is a third Raidou Kuzunoha from the far-flung future that is taking over Kaya. They bluntly say that their goal is to change the future by changing the past. This completely robs the reveal at the very end during the final confrontation. There is an argument to be made about how poorly and vaguely the reveal of who the spirit was in the original and how it was handled, that there was room to explore this idea more in the remake. In the original, their sole line to explain who they are was that they have the same title as you. The fact that it's Raidou the 40th was revealed in some fan book later and was only left as the spirit inhabiting Kaya in the game itself. But I have to imagine that this was done for a reason, that who they are wasn't really important originally, and that these extended bits were something that they thought up later. Sadly, there doesn't seem to currently be an interview where they delve into this subject, but I imagine imagine this will become information known to the public at some later date. If some interviewer sees this video and eventually gets to interview Yamai, please ask him what was the thought process and reasoning behind the changes to how Raidou the 40th is handled in the remake. The speech Raidou the 40th gives you in the final confrontation is interesting, we'll talk more about it in just a minute, but how the rest of this character and their plot beats are handled throughout the game leaves a lot to be desired. In Chapter 10, when returning to your office, Rasputin gives you an extended conversation in the remake which delves into who he actually is, how he is basically an android time cop from the future to protect the timeline and stop people from fucking with it, further explains what's going on if you somehow did not understand by this point that Munakata and the time-traveling Raidou from the future possessing Kaya are up to no good, despite characters constantly talking about time travel, multiple timelines, timeline anomalies in the most blunt way possible. Since Chapter 4, Goto is for some reason confused and surprised by all of this, despite first-hand witnessing timeline hopping and every single overly drawn-out villain plan breakdown up until this point. He also gives you a more clear explanation of where to go next compared to the original, which is one point where I could see people getting confused at where to go and what to do. When Goto goes up to the satellite in Chapter 11, as it's about to explode, he decides that now is a great time to repeat everything that everyone has been saying about the spirit possessing Kaya actually being a Raidou Kuzunoha from the future. How it's so crazy that there's gonna be a battle of the Raidous. It may sound like I am beating a dead horse at this point, but that's just how the game is. It needlessly explains concepts early and continues to repeat itself all the time. Did they expect that this game was supposed to be played by 5-year-olds? That it needed Pokemon level hand-holding? In the original, this is the last time you see Goto until the reveal that he is still alive in the body of a raven in the post-credits scene. Now they completely undercut any emotional response that you could have at his death by having his disembodied voice speak to you in the very next scene.
Raidou, can you hear my voice? It's me, Goto.
Then you leave the detective agency, and for some reason the Goto from the other timeline is here now and decides that he's going to tag along. This now gives your Goto a physical body to share, along with a bunch of new lines of the two Gotos arguing and cutting each other off in this really forced comedic bits. For the final nail in the they really must think that the people who are buying this game are illiterate morons, the final chapter has one last unnecessary recap from Narumi, who then has to summarize the events of the entire game up until this point. This is really the straw that breaks the camel's back, because it's so drawn out and worded in a way that feels like they didn't expect a single person that's playing this game to have a IQ higher than a meat locker's room temp. You'd only need this if you've somehow fallen asleep in every single cutscene of the game, or somehow took 100 hours to get through to this point in a game that you can finish in less than 10 hours if you just focus on the main story. Then you enter the final dungeon and Raidou the 40th reveals who they are, as if this is some shocking revelation and not a thing that you've been told time and time again for hours by other people. An actual interesting expansion to the story worth talking about and dissecting is found in the final confrontation with Raidou the 40th. In the original, they talk about how your actions will result in vile leaders coming into power, that freedom is an illusion witnessed through a cage. They think these monsters should not have control over the fate of the people, and it's their mission to prevent that from ever happening. But because you stopped Taisho 20 from experiencing any major timeline changes, their mission has failed. They have nothing left. They are defeated and broken. They seek now to only destroy the blind, judgmental fool who doomed the future and doesn't even know it. In the remake, they give us an insight of what society is like at their point in time. The world has been gifted a false and hollow peace at the hand of God. This leads to only driving humans further into madness. The Kuzunohas have become mere pawns for the government and military. The reason they are the 40th is because that's just how many died before them. Some don't even last a day with the title. Their sword has been redesigned from the basic katana in the original to a more cybernetic one. The new rebalanced fight is pretty fun, but at the end of the day, this is still a pretty shallow and mashy action game, so you aren't exactly getting Mission 19 Virgil. It's fun enough and gets the job done. Sadly, the skybox is not as nice as it is in the original. It is initially missing that blend of the Starry Night sky and endless endlessly rolling fog. The final boss is actually much easier than the original. The longest segment here is the fight with the demons they spawn in. The actual ship fights, which were the thing that dragged the battle out for nearly an hour, are actually the easiest parts in the remake. All the really annoying fights in the original are not nearly as ball-breaking as they were. Having a dodge roll and an active skill that makes it so you take no damage from anything other than physical attacks when most bosses just cast spells the entire game really does make things a lot easier. Mishaguji is so easy and can only really be annoying because it spawns in these little dudes that heal him if you don't focus the shitters down. Your dodge roll makes the previously incredibly difficult to deal with charm waves a complete afterthought. The only time any of these bosses pose any issue is when some of their bullshit hitboxes from their unblockable attacks clips you, stunning you, which then allows them to follow up and kill you before you even have a chance to gain control again. Now, I've spent the last 9-ish pages complaining about what the remake does worse than the original, which really sucks because I was enjoying my time with the game initially. Hell, I still overall like the game at the end of the day, but it's undeniable that the more I played it, the more the cracks started to show, that this wasn't the perfect remake remaster we had hoped for. It for sure doesn't replace the original, which is something the director of the game even said that they weren't trying to do, despite the fact that the originals aren't accessible officially anywhere outside of the PS3 PSN digital store, which is only purchasable through a PS3 itself. You can't even view the game on the PSN website, and with the constant threat that this thing is going to be shut down, I'm not really holding out hope that will remain there forever. I highly doubt they are going to put the resources and time into porting those games, even if that's all I really wanted. I seriously think there is a strong foundation in this remake. There is a lot of good improvements. The combat is fun. Having demons from 2 and future SMT games backported to this is great, but for every great change in the right direction, there are also equally, if not more, things that I think are taking away from the overall experience that was found in the original. I want nothing but the best for this game because I love the Raidou series and I want a third installment, but to get the best possible version of that game, or hell, even the best version that this game could be, then there are things that need to be changed, and discussing them is okay and should not be met with such annoying, dismissive, toxic positivity anytime someone voices a complaint or a concern, especially when you admit that you did not play the originals and have no frame of reference when the other person does. I'd still recommend picking this game up, especially if you are someone who can't stomach going back to games from 2006 and 2008. There is a lot to like here, but it could be better. The future is hopefully bright for the Raidou series, but I really hope that if an eventual remake of 2 does happen, it doesn't fall into the same trappings as Raidou Remastered: Mystery of the Soulless Army. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thank you for watching as always. If you really liked the video, then please pass it around, leave a like, and comment. And if you really like the channel and want to see more videos like this, maybe consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a YouTube member. It is the best way to support me directly and to guarantee more videos like this happen, especially when they get out of control and grow into sizes they weren't originally intended for and take way longer to make than I initially estimated. Like this video was not supposed to be 2.5 hours, and was supposed to come out like 2 months ago, yet here we are. All patrons and members get access to videos a day early, along with a $7 tier to view rough cuts of upcoming videos, like you can view a 20-minute segment of the Drakengard retrospective, and the first review for the Onimusha multi-game review. I am now going to shout out all of my $5 and up patrons and YouTube members who really help support the channel. Bully, Densha, Strawberry Tofu, Turbo Chicken, Scary Dinosaur, Burley, Chikun Highwind, Dev Welkin, Kevin Velasquez, Lotto, Metal Cactus, Medi Not the Bad Guy, Quartz, Sayin Heggy, Slemph Tingle, Vaso, Friday Night Fragging, Ben Johnson, Ben Olberg, Buckets, Chichometrius, Ek Frazo, Jacob Hamilton, Leon, Nicholas Pedinato, Pittori Bursky, Shisaji, Silver Ghosts, Trevor, and Neutral Guy. Thank you so much, everyone. As for what's coming out next, I plan to focus on the Yakuza 3 retrospective, but I might try to finally finish and go back and do the Drakengard one, just because we're closing in on September. I'd end with the amount of art assets and commissions I'm getting for the Yakuza 3 retrospective, it probably won't be done before the ad season ends for 2025. But becoming a donator through Patreon or YouTube members definitely helps speed up that process. Don't want to promise anything. I don't know what the hell is going to happen with my life and everything next, but hopefully something big comes out and everybody likes it. I also have a bunch of small, shorter videos that I want to try and get out just to supplement uploads since it's been so long between the big ones. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky to keep up to date for future videos, and that's pretty much it. As always, thank you everybody for watching. Please share the video around if you really like it so it can do very well because it took so much time, and hopefully whatever comes out next you'll like it, and see you next time.